100 basis points or 1%, which is to say that the Federal Reserve will be offering somewhere near 3.5 to 4% interest. And that will obviously mean that people will be attracted to moving their money into dollars because the dollars are increasing in value versus all the other currencies. And the second largest currency block is, of course, the euro. And we've seen yesterday or the day before the dollars becoming achieving what's called parity with the euro. That's €1 for $1. Now we have seen this before. We've seen parity previously when, and again, remember what we say: if America gets a cold, Europe gets the flu, and the emerging markets get COVID, is the new way of thinking about it. And the reason why this happens is because there is a feedback loop. As the dollar strengthens, people who borrow in dollars have obviously to pay back more, relatively speaking, of those dollars. And so the yields across the emerging markets have spiked, and I shared in the back channel, but I'll try and look up those rates again. Let me find them. The yield to maturity for the following countries: Ukraine is 50%. That means the yield on their bonds is 50%. Argentina, 43%. Tunisia, 33%. El Salvador, 30%. Pakistan, 28%. Ghana, 22%. Egypt, 15%. So you see that there's a ripple effect. That's the cascade. So the ripple effect is that those countries have trouble borrowing. Those countries have trouble supporting their critical infrastructure, and that leads to geopolitical unrest as people find that they have fuel shortages because now they're competing with stronger countries to be able to purchase that fuel and food and everything else. So we are entering what is a spiral. And the big issue is that when the dollar becomes super strong, it means that earnings, so the S&P 500 companies who earn in dollars, even if they're pricing in euros in the local market, they're reporting in dollars. It means that their dollar earnings will fall, and that means that the multiple, the amount of times that you pay for future earnings from the stock market is likely to fall as well. And so what you have then is what Jay Powell is trying to achieve is, as he said, demand destruction. He can't affect the supply side of inflation. He can't affect the Chinese ability to deliver to the ports, but he can destroy demand from the consumer. So the aim of the Fed at this moment in time is to rein in demand and effectively slow down the economy in order to bring that inflation number down to what they're targeting, around 4%. And this will inevitably create a recession. The likelihood of that recession is looking like it will be in Q4, and then we'll have to see where the world sits after that. But this is a cascade. It's a liquidity. There will be liquidity issues, and there will be borrowing issues, and this will affect the housing market, the automotive market, and then we'll see where the world goes.
So, Nicholas, I have a question. So, that day, and the analysis we're talking about that actually even indicated not only a better than expected, but also wage increased because that employers cannot find enough employees. And they say that that creates a loop in terms of the inflation you were talking about, because now they have a bit better than better income than they can afford to pay, which increase the inflation, and then it just creates that loop. How's that? I just wondered, how does that work really? You would think that, having a better jobs market would be a good thing for the economy, but they say that for trying to tamp down the inflation, it's actually is bad. So how does that work, if you have any idea?
So the wage price spiral or the wage inflation is what governments have always been, terrified about, because it's very hard to take someone's wages down, right? So the reason why generally you don't want, or governments or financial systems don't want, wage price inflation is that it effectively means that you settle on a new higher cost input, and other prices can ameliorate. So if gas goes up and then it goes down, the price of gas goes down. When you put wages up, they don't go down, and so it embeds inflation into the system. That's the basic answer. And so the issue with that we're seeing in the employment market is that there is still an undersupply of workers, because a lot of workers retired, but also a lot of people are not employed in jobs that are, good, what we would say good jobs. They are employed in the gig economy, they are employed in, or self-employed, and that creates, a lot of peril for families and for stability. So, historically, wage price inflation has been the big fear, and is watched quite closely. In this situation, we've got input price inflation, and whilst we had zero interest rate policies, we had massive asset inflation. All of that is going to unwind.
Nicholas, I have a question for you. I love the way you coherently sort of laid that out. I guess the point or the question that I have is, what's the point of globalism if we can't control supply side, we can crush demand? At what point is it more damaging to bars and the global economy than crushing demand? So at what point, I guess I'd draw a parallel. There's a certain psychology that is a wealth effect, which I'm sure you're aware of. There is the belief that when gas gets to $8.25, $8.50, $10, there's a dramatic consumer change and shift. So in the overview that you just articulated very well, at what point in time does the demand question backfire over the U.S. and global economy, and Jay turns, and then turns, and then all of a sudden and I'm not saying that the recession is over, just the opposite, but at what point in time, where's the pleasure, where does the psychological and the financial impacts sit on the pleasure pain continuum?
Okay, so good question. I think we have to start with some basics in order, and these basics relate also to the crypto market and a lot of the misunderstandings that less sophisticated, or people that thought they were sophisticated, misunderstand about markets in general and about money in general. So we live in a credit-based economy. So once we left the gold standard, we live in a world where it's all about risk. And so the generally accepted wisdom is that we can tolerate 2% inflation because over a very long period of time, you see the devaluation of the currency. So if you imagine 2% inflation going up every year, people don't notice a 2% inflation rate. And what you want to be able to do is to balance your risk, so the interest that you receive. So people don't invest money if there's no yield or interest on that money. That's a risk premium. And so the reason why we've had this massive asset inflation, property going up, the stock market going up, etc., is because the aim of the game since forever, since 1992 is where I've been watching it since, but definitely since the GFC, the global financial crisis, has been to make rates extremely low, so that it would not be attractive to keep money in cash. It forces people to invest their money in order that they can get a yield on that money. That's the risk premium. Now, the key thing for the global economy is that you don't want too much inflation and you don't want too little inflation. If you don't have inflation of any kind, you're not growing. So the whole world that we live in is all about the GDP, the measure of the productivity of your economy, and you want that to expand. And it expands by people lending money, the form of credit creation. So when people talk about money printing, they're really misunderstanding that what's really created is credit. And that credit is actually, so for example, the balance sheet of the Fed is actually owned by all of us. You know, that $8 trillion is our money, essentially. And so, because it's owned by the government, it's owned by the Treasury, etc. And so you need a constant rate of expansion, like the universe. There's a constant rate of expansion, enables you to manage the money supply and enables you to manage the risk premium. When you get inflation that is at this level, 9.1%, what you're doing is you're devaluing that money in a way that people notice it. You know, Keynes said, you know, the way that, you know, inflation is the way that you secretly and unobservedly remove value from the general population. So the mandate of the Fed is to keep stable prices and inflation under control. And in their case, was the dual mandate they talk about is interest rates and unemployment. So those are their two aims. They don't have really any. They don't care about dollar strength. That's a third element. So the pernicious part of inflation is that it means that people cannot estimate what the risk premium is and what the yield should be for making an investment, and therefore you have the risk of stagnation and inflation at the same time. That's what people call stagflation. That's what, you know, central bankers are terrified of. That's what we've been seeing really in other markets like Japan, where there's not much growth. So the most important thing is to bring the inflation down to a level that enables people to make future decisions without feeling that the value of their money is going to be destroyed. And so the key aim for Jay Powell, who leads the world, because, you know, like we said, 60% of all the money in the world is dollar-based, and all the, you know, the bills and the invoices and everything else is dollar-based. That means that his job is to get that down to the 2% target rate and to go back to business as usual. They cannot afford elevated inflation over a long period of time. It is against the whole ethos of a credit-based economy. You won't, you know, be able to get that growth going. So they need to get growth going again, which means they need to bring down inflation at almost all costs. Now, the transitory element of where inflation is, this 8-9%, is partly also feeding on itself. It becomes a spiral, because the reason why inflation is high is because gas is in the inflation numbers, rent is in the inflation numbers, so it feeds on itself. And so what you want to avoid is that spiraling out of control. So this is the number one aim for Jerome Powell, and he makes this very clear. If you listen to the monthly reports, he tells you directly what he's going to do. What market participants do is that they look 6 months further out. So traders look to the future. They don't trade the past. They don't trade today's data. They say, what's going to happen tomorrow that is going to give me an edge, and is my vision correct? Does that answer your question?
It does, Nicholas. Thank you very much. So I think I get it. And by the way, the wealth effect that I refer to is, and Nicholas, keep me honest here, is basically, you know, as markets are going up, you perceive for every 1,000, it's a 6% lift, right? So every $1,000 you see in your bank account, your discretionary spending that you would spend on other things that are not crucial is $60. So if your house goes up $100,000, you do the math, right? Okay, I can spend $6,000 on this, that, or the other. Did I capture that well, Nicholas?
Well, your purchasing power's gone down, right? So even though inflation's gone up, the value of what you can buy has gone down, because everyone adjusts their prices to the new price, because they know that the money is less valuable. And that's why it becomes a spiral. So, you know, this is why it's embedded in the numbers. So
right.
This is what causes the cascade. It's a false effect. Now, what the real effect is that if you're a dollar holder and you're going to Europe, your purchasing power improved 20% over the course of the last year. The euro went from 120 to 1. So the dollar relative to euros has become more valuable. You can buy more with it. But in domestic terms, inflation just destroys your purchasing power. It is a mirage.
Right. No. Yeah. Exactly. I was referring. The wealth effect cuts in both directions, both in an up market and also in a down market. So when things are going up and to the right, everybody feels good. For every $1,000 you make in your 401k or your bank accounts, your discretionary spending goes up by 6%. That benefits everybody, including Home Depot and Lowe's, et cetera. So I think we've got that. So yeah, it cuts both ways. It goes up in an appreciated market, and it certainly goes. I would probably argue to say that it goes down even more. I haven't studied that. The second question is when you crush demand, there's two aspects of it. I'm thinking kind of like a decision tree. There is, yes, you want to bring valuations into their proper strata. When you crush demand, though, you do hurt the supply chain of other countries. So is part of this, what Jay is doing, is this to penalize the production of other countries, say China?
No.
Okay. All right.
Isn't it, as he made clear, he is not responsible for the US dollar. That he is responsible for inflation, and he fights inflation through interest rate rises, and he's responsible for full employment in the economy. That's what the Fed, and at the recent testimony, a couple of senators started talking to him about this, and he was like, look, that's just not my remit. That's, your remit. So when the dollar becomes strong, it obviously means that the input prices, if you've got multiple pieces of the bill of materials coming from different places, are all actually becoming cheaper relatively. But at the same time, it's creating spirals inside of all of those other domestic markets. And so, it's really, important that we understand that inflation is the enemy. We need to bring it down. And unless you can increase supply, you have to destroy demand. And so Jerome Powell's aim is to destroy demand. And at the moment, what you're seeing is that demand destruction is not really kicking in as hard as possible. But the numbers are lagging. So what we're seeing in the numbers that are the live numbers is that there have been a massive spike in repossessions of automotives that we're seeing from the auto dealers. There are also reports of obviously a slowing housing market. We're also seeing a lot of defaults on borrowing, where people are not paying back all the money that they owe, etc. Those are all signs that demand is being destroyed and that markets will start to normalize. But we're going to have to go through a recession in order that, not in order, we are going to create a recession in America in order to tamp the fire down. So just think about inflation like it's a fire, and it starts burning in the basement, and it's only small, and you can keep throwing cups of water on it. But as it starts, burning through the basement and, gets more tinder, it's going to, set the whole thing on fire. And the Fed cannot afford for that to happen. It does, however, mean that the dollar asserts its supremacy, and that's the reason why we've been saying that other nations will want to move away from that dollar supremacy. And that was why you've got all of these other actions. And I think I posted in the back channel Putin talking, very openly about his belief that he is stimulating basically an attack on the Western liberal dollar hegemony that is currently affecting everybody. So it is their aim to destabilize all those countries that have a relationship to the dollar, and the increasing costs of their borrowing and the increasing cost of their ability to run their economies when the dollar is accelerating in value, because the economy is in America's $25 trillion economy is actually much more robust than any other economy in the world, save for maybe China, but China is a $14 trillion economy, but relatively, or 16 or so. And they have a much lower standard of living, they have much lower everything than Americans. And so America can withstand this, but it creates a giant amount of pain. And that giant amount of pain, when it hits food and fuel and regular people, they will go on the streets and they will demand change from their governments, or they will, revolt, and that is what we are seeing. So much in the same way as there was an Arab Spring that was post the GFC, this is another form of people venting because of what is happening and is what is likely to continue to happen.
Thank you, Nicholas. On a lighter note, I just want to say this is really a great chance for American to leverage on your strong US dollar to explore the world. Don't worry about air tickets. I just checked that Finnair, you can fly via Helsinki if you're going Europe. And if you're going to Asia, please consider to fly Singapore Airlines. Thank you. Tyler, are you back?
Yep, I'm back.
Welcome back.
Yeah. Thanks. So I really liked the Putin video that Nicholas shared in our private little back channel.
Yeah, I've pinned on
Where
top too.
Okay, there it is. Thanks. If you haven't watched that, that's worth watching because uh, he basically is making the case that why he really went into Ukraine was to kick the beehive of and let shit hit the fan in a big way, which would rock the boat enough to cause waves to potentially, break up the whole status quo of the U.S. driven world order. And yeah, everyone. I mean, gosh, the question is he bluffing or not? Because
It's happening.
yeah, to a degree, in one sense, it's happening. And the question is, what did he really intend for that, or is it happening? And now that it's happening, he's saying, so you see, I'm a genius after all. I went into Ukraine, and this is happening, and this was my plan all along. It's possible.
Well, I've been questioning the COVID zero policies because what COVID zero does is it means that you have supply controls. You keep on tamping down the supply. So that creates the only route. So this is all just a chess game. So my view is he's a smart guy. Anyone who's playing these games at the macro level knows that, markets work in this way and traders will trade on the basis of this information because that's economic and that's incentive design. So it is my opinion that he's not back justifying. I believe that, as we've said, or certainly I've been banging this drum for a long time, that this is the aim of the game. I mean, if China was to drop COVID zero, they would be able to supply the market and they would be able to drop prices. But they are not going to do that. And the question I was kept on saying to you is, why are they doing this? Are they doing this to affect the supply chain? Or are they doing this because they know more about COVID and its potential risks than we do? Those are the only two options. So I believe that Putin is a very smart operator. Remember, this is the richest man in the world. There is no man on earth richer than Putin. So he understands money and markets extremely well. And remember, the reason why he took up against Hillary Clinton was the Magnitsky Act, which sought to remove his proxies. His reason for backing Donald Trump was because the previous administration had gone after all of the oligarchs all over the world in order to tamp and affect his wealth. He is an extremely, extremely savvy operator.
Yeah. Okay. He's also claiming, emphasizing that there's now growing support for Russia around the world. And additionally hints that the ruling elites in the United States and satellite states could soon face a wrath of their own people. So this is where it turns into, is he it gets quite propaganda-ish, really. It gets
He is using his knowledge to socially engineer a a backlash against
right.
the Western liberal democratic situation, and he's doing quite well at it. And it's the trigger effect in those weaker economies. Remember remember I was talking about the Shanghai Organization, the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. All of the countries that I just read out before, I don't know if you're there, that are having this yield to maturity spike because of the dollar, increase in the dollar value, are all the people that want to enfranchise into their, alternative version of SWIFT. So remember the non-aggression pact that was signed just by at the time of the Chinese Olympics. Those actions said to me very clearly that they were working in tandem in order to create the alternative financial system. So that's really the game. You've got the dollar system, as we've always said. Then you're going to have the digital yuan system and the SCO, alternative system, and then you've got crypto, which is outside of nation states. It is, I'm going to win the bingo again today. It is meta. That means it is above the macro and the micro situation. And so those are our choices. That is what is going to emerge once we've been through this slow motion crisis.
Okay. So are other non-tech news to jump into? Or we go right into the tech news? I think we jump into the tech news, yeah? Okay, so air horn, as tradition requires. Here we go. The first big story today, Wednesday, July 13th, comes from the New York Times and everyone else. And actually, it really comes from Brett Taylor's Twitter account because they're just regurgitating what he tweets, where he says that Twitter has filed a lawsuit in the Delaware courts to hold Elon Musk accountable to his contractual obligations. Okay, to be continued. We're going to watch that drama unfold. I don't think there's any additional nuance to be shared at this point, is there? Not yet.
Well, I guess Tyler, just the discrepancy between what the courts are saying and his Twitter post of checkmate.
And he also tweeted, "Oh, the irony," with no link to anything and no additional content.
Right. Yeah.
I guess he's referring to the fact that they were trying to not sell to him, and now they're doing everything they can to make the sale happen.
Well, we could drain the rest of this call, and I know we're not going to do that, but I think just the closing point on this so we can get forward is I tend to believe that he has some side of inside track on what the real number of the bots are, what percentage. And at 5% it's acceptable. My guess is when he says something like checkmate, he knows that it's something well north of that. So we can't speculate. I mean, that's been the story for the last 2 months, but it'll be interesting to see what the checkmate comment implies to me that he already has the data. So.
Hey, Matt, let me actually add to that. He signed an agreement. He didn't do diligence, and I don't think that the agreement was contingent on a specified percentage of bots. I haven't heard that. I know that he's trying to throw that out there as an issue, but that he should have done his diligence before he signed the agreement. So he's deflecting, and just because Elon says something and says it on Twitter doesn't make it true. So again, he's the master of deflection and just throwing shit out there and making, as you are doing, hypothesizing that there's actual meaning to this or that there's actual validity to it. That's template Elon. So actually he's in the courts, and there were several rooms on this yesterday, including with corporate attorneys who actually understand the issues. It's that what's likely to happen is they're going to court. It's not going to go through a full trial and settlement and forced purchase. It may or may not happen. It's unlikely, but what this does is it forces negotiations behind the scenes. And again, he signed the agreement. The bot issue is a deflection.
Good point.
He's not going to, your point is that he won't be able to convince the court that that's a meaningful, based on the wording of the agreement. There's nowhere in the agreement that he gave himself an escape hatch like that, where
Right. He didn't. There's no contingencies. There's no contingencies on bots, or he would have brought that up at the start and said, "Look, here's
Yeah,
line X that says this."
I don't
He
think
waived diligence,
I don't think
and
contingency would specifically name bots, but I think there must be some kind of escape hatch clause that refers to meaningful uh, something of meaningful impact on the fundamental business, which then he's going to try to make the argument that the bots are a meaningful.
but that wasn't discoverable or didn't exist before he signed the agreement. These bots have been there. So this came up again, Tyler, yesterday, which is people are trying to put this under a material adverse change or kind of a force
Right,
majeure clause. These
right,
bots existed beforehand. He didn't hide them. He
right,
waived diligence. So
right.
again, this is just deflection.
So your point,
People,
yeah, to keep
yeah,
to really take that point to the end. If he were to have present data that 99% of Twitter accounts are in fact bots, then it wouldn't matter based on the wording of the agreement.
I haven't read the agreement, but what he's alleged so far is not meaningful, and he waived. If this was a contingency of his signing that agreement or moving forward, he should have put it in the agreement, and he didn't. And he had that opportunity. These are not unsophisticated attorneys or bargaining parties.
Yeah. Well, the one point that I'm I that I don't hear mentioned is that, as you were referring to, kind of classic Elon behavior. Uh, another sort of classic Elon behavior is company politics or corporate development, corporate jujitsu, I would call it, corporate judo, as he wasn't even the founder of Tesla or even a co-founder or PayPal. These were all kind of corporate jujitsu moves where he ends up on top, and he, that is he's exhibited that many times over the years.
Otherwise known as deflection and manipulation. Yes, I agree with you.
Right.
So that's
So
what he does. I mean, when he
my
puts out
point.
there that I'm buying or I'm selling,
Right.
he's manipulating markets, companies,
Right.
etc.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So I think I wouldn't underestimate his proclivity for such corporate jujitsu as it applies to Twitter, because I assume he would apply that in mergers and acquisitions in a similar way, in a way that Twitter isn't familiar with. I mean, I don't know Twitter's legal team, and I'm sure they're great, but I imagine he takes things to another level than most folks probably do, and so that's why I hold an asterisk. I'm really curious to see how this plays out.
It is going to be interesting, but the question is going to be whether, I mean, he's decimated Twitter. I mean, they're in a downward spiral. It's going to be interesting what he gets at the end of the day if he's forced to buy them, which is more than likely.
Okay, so the next big topic.
Tyler, before you
Yes.
move on,
Okay.
so I want to just kind of take a step back. I spent 10 years as a financial advisor, and I left because people didn't really. Elon's a great picture of this. I just want to break it into intentions, desires, and values. I think going into this, just like Putin had the intention to take over Kyiv, and he had some desires with Xi so that he could take Taiwan, and things just didn't work out that way. So it comes down to their values, how they're moving forward, how they're composed. Look at Elon. He wanted to liquidate $8 billion of Twitter. He had to have fines, or sorry, of Tesla stock. So you have to have an excuse. You got to have something to buy. And if he's going to do jujitsu, his intention was also to not get deplatformed like Trump, because he had a bit of a mouth. And if the SEC did start to regulate his speech and what he can say, so he was trying to do, and I think that it was one of his earliest intentions was to not get deplatformed. Best way to do that, own the platform. That's insurance. And then it comes down to his values. We see him trying to weasel out of it. because the price fell. And that if you just keep it at those basic core, before you get into whether you like Elon or you're in the cult or you like the technology or any, remove names. That's how I look at it as a financial advisor. Somebody got over their skis, the market went the other way, and they're trying to get out of it. And that's if we let this guy who the SEC doesn't seem to want to regulate or bring sanctions against, because I think they want to see him lose 20 billion on this, and let the markets themselves, to let capitalism itself correct for an Elon, than someone who was so outspoken that became a manipulator, that was so full of crap, that so much vaporware. I just think that it's time for us to like stop putting our initial priors into it and see it for what it is.
Yeah, but
The
what happens
market
to
shifting on him.
Twitter? What about those of us
Who
who are
cares?
active?
Let Europe come up with an incumbent. That's what we need. If somebody ruins a company and they go back to being a shell of themselves, that's economic upheaval. We talk about capitalism. Who cares? I don't like. If we can. Do you think somebody can't replace the technology of Twitter
It,
eventually?
it's not the technology. That's the difference
The
between.
network. I think the problem with society is too much of the media that wants to be first to put the salacious headline on. They suck on the teat of Twitter. They live and die by what what aftershocks or pre-quakes there might be, and they put us into clickbait disinformation. So Twitter hasn't brought us everything great.
I use Twitter to communicate with my community. You
So
know,
do it on Facebook. Find another platform that substitutes. That's what the economy does. That's Darwinism. You won't not have Twitter, but you and your you go to Discord. There's other places communities can go.
they won't go. Discord is awful. This is just my personal opinion, but I really do believe there should be some punishment for Elon. And I also think that one reason, David, why he backed out of his offer was that he had other investors involved, and they probably saw it on a more rational basis than he did.
And they didn't agree to his no due diligence BS. And he's the one that has to suffer. Let's just keep it at a what you could explain to a sixth grader.
Yes, I believe he does have to suffer.
But by the way, all the things that you guys are debating don't even matter legally, okay? Because there's a lot of case law in Delaware regarding companies trying to terminate merger agreements, and very often the courts there have enforced them. There's a major case 20 years ago, but people still look back on with Tyson and IBP, which is another food producer, where Tyson tried to back out of the deal, and the court made them complete the deal. So, I mean, this is going to come down to law. It's not going to come down to the cult of Elon Musk. All these rooms everybody talks about, it's all about the cult of Elon Musk. And the cult of Elon Musk will not be an issue, okay, when it actually gets into a court in Delaware. And I'm just
Yeah,
letting
as
I
Ken
agree
pointed
with you.
out, David, and I'm going to
But
get,
they didn't
yeah,
take the cult away.
yeah. What you guys are saying is true, and then we could hash this thing out for 3 hours, which would kill this room. So feel free. I'm sure there'll be lots of rooms on Clubhouse about it today. But as Ken said, just for people in the audience who don't understand this, it's in Delaware, which is because they are both probably um whatchamacallit, organized in Delaware, and that court has experience. It has prior case law to rely on, the precedent that word that keeps coming up. But and it's also the courts there are experienced with corporations in this type of instance. And so, as Ken said, there's a very similar case they can rely on with Tyson Foods from 20 years ago. There's also just contract enforcement, and this contract was didn't he signed it, he waived due diligence. It's totally Elon, cult of Elon bullshit. He's now stuck with it, and he can't say that the drop in share price or the bots are some significant material adverse post signing act that was unforeseeable, which is the airtight clause that should have been drafted. If he really wanted out, his attorneys are smart. These are sophisticated players. They should have drafted those provisions, those outs, more clearly, if that's what they wanted, and he did not do that. So it is going to come down to law, and these are big firms. It's going to be interesting. It's not going to be, they're very good.
To Dr. Fran's point, like I do empathize with that. And look, I'm on
I'm on 5 different platforms, and I have a network of, most of them I don't like. That's why I'm here talking to all of you today, because I like Clubhouse, because there's a value exchange for it. Maybe it's not perfect, but there's certain social media platforms that I don't like the inherent position of their leadership. I think the business model is corrupt. But Dr. Fran, it's like I'm in the same boat in a different way. I have no place else to go for that type of experience across multiple, parents and friends and grandparents. I think there's a lot of people that feel trapped on whatever platform they are. Sometimes the platform is good, sometimes the leadership's not, or sometimes the platform's good, the leadership isn't, and vice versa. So I think that there is a pent up demand for people seeking another platform and not having a platform to go, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. My final point.
Okay, so the next big topic is from Bloomberg about an in-depth look at the rise and fall of crypto hedge fund Three Arrows Capital, whose founders, Sue Zhu and Kyle Davies, bet everything on prices only going up and are now in hiding and now telling people they need to buy a new coin. uh, if I have my memory correct, one of these victims of this whole crash is now trying to tell people to buy a new coin to get their value back out. But anyway, Suzu and Davies turned Three Arrows Capital into the most important hedge fund in crypto, but they bet everything on prices only going up. It's the story from Bloomberg. Okay. So the next one is from the New York Times. They say they have sources that Apple ends its consulting agreement with Johnny Ive, the kind of legendary designer, which started with the iMac back in 2000 when Apple was scraping the bottom of the barrel and barely getting by, and then the whole return, one of the most triumphant returns in corporate history, came. You could say it started with that first Johnny Ive designed iMac, and just had an incredible string of hits after that. Really, probably has had a bigger impact on tech hardware than perhaps any other person from an aesthetic standpoint. Anyway, truly incredible talent. So he resigned a few years back, and now they're ending the consultant agreement because he kind of had to stay on to kind of help keep the ship going in the right direction. But now that part's ending. So it says Johnny Ive, Apple ends the consulting agreement that made Apple his firm's primary client and limited Ive from taking on work Apple found competitive. Oh, okay. So now he can work with other companies on things that they feel are competitive. Okay. So they locked him up so that he couldn't take all of his incredible deep expertise and work with other companies, but now that's expired and now he can do that. But I mean, just to give you some context, like, he reported very, very directly with Steve. I mean, he was as high as it gets within the Apple ecosystem. And it's often said that Steve had more respect for Johnny than perhaps anybody in the company. And anywho, interesting development. The next is from Reuters. Vermont's Department of Financial Regulation joins a multi-state investigation into Celsius and says it believes the cryptocurrency lender is, quote, deeply insolvent. That's the word going around town. The next is from Casey Newton. He's a tech blogger. And the piece says a critique of Ev Williams's 10-year tenure at Medium and how it got caught in the middle between Substack and well-founded publishers like BuzzFeed and Vice. So Casey's written a piece, and the New York Times wrote a piece on a similar topic, saying Medium founder Ev Williams is stepping down as CEO to be replaced by Tony Stumblebine. Williams plans to start a new holding company, Research Lab. And he did a tweet saying, here we go. Where is it? There it is. He says, 10 years ago, this is today, he tweeted this. 10 years ago, I was brainstorming with Biz, who was one of the co-founders of Twitter, about a publishing platform. We talked about having a constraint like Twitter, not too short, but not too long. I went to the whiteboard and wrote Medium. Whatever it is, I said we should call it that. And then the second part of the tweet says, in the intervening substance through which, he defines the word medium. The intervening substance through which impressions are conveyed to the senses or a force acts on objects at the distance. And he says, it's been gratifying, challenging, creative, fun, hard, fascinating journey for me running this company, and it's time for me to hand over the reins. Medium isn't going anywhere, but I will be moving to chairman of the board. The new CEO is a longtime Medium partner and collaborator of mine, Tony Stumblebine. And that's a very old, very close associate of Evans, long before Medium, even in the very early Twitter days. So anyway, there you go.
I hope this guy has experience in monetizing products, because I've been writing for Medium since it began. I became part of their partner program. I have a lot of followers. I don't even count, and I make $3.50 a month.
Yeah, it seems like there's a profound opportunity there, in the same way that like there are so many people making so much money on YouTube, right? Perhaps more people making more money than they even should. YouTube's doing a fantastic job of monetizing mediocre people. And why isn't there a text version of that? I guess is the question, yeah? Let alone really
Yeah,
impressive.
I ask myself that every day because I'm a writer,
Right,
and
right.
every day I get
Autoplay.
slapped in the face. You can get $3.50. You can get a little more from Substack, $70 a year from 100 people, but it's just not. It's just not enough.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, there's thousands and thousands and a really crazy amount of people making crazy money on YouTube, and there's likely to be not in the near future a truly insane amount of people making impressive money on things like TikTok, if it's still operating in the U.S. next year, and yet in the text domain, it's relatively peanuts by comparison.
Yeah, but Tyler, if you just use Francine's numbers, if you only had 70 followers or daily users in YouTube, you wouldn't be making a fortune. The reason why some people are making a lot of money on YouTube is because they've managed to get, hundreds of thousands of subscribers,
Yeah.
or more, millions,
And because video ads monetize better than text ads, I assume. Yeah. So
You
next,
can also autoplay on YouTube and leave it running all night and serve a bunch of ads, but people don't auto read. You need your conscious attention to do that. The media itself is different.
okay. Okay. Okay, hold on one second here while I get just check on something. Okay, so the next big topic is from The Verge that Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, told Googlers that Google will slow hiring for the rest of the year and will have to work with greater urgency, sharper focus, and more hunger. Yep. It's kind of similar to what all the tech companies are doing, where if you're, by the way, reading between the lines just a little bit on that, that sounds like a very googly way to say you need to up your game or else, as a prelude to all the cuts that are happening everywhere else. And I have to imagine that the Googlers themselves have now realized that all the other big companies that's surrounding them have are Facebook very recently. What was the one that was super recent? There's been a ton. They're all big.
Tyler.
Tyler,
Yeah.
Tyler,
Yes.
this is a very interesting pattern as well because when an organization goes through a downtime, and they're large like Google, hey, hey Matt, Microsoft, Oracle, and a few of the others, it's like the first step in the process, right? And they have a really lovely way of putting it into fancy words, but at the end of the day, it's basically saying, "Hey, we're on a hiring freeze, and your job's going to get overloaded more because we have to make up for that workload, and we'll be observing you. And if you make it through this quote unquote test, then you might be fortunate enough to still have a job at the end of the whatever period that is. But if you're not, they're going to watch other soft skills and interpersonal skills to see how well you fare when they press on you with more work. Because, of course, you're working at Google and you're working at Meta. You might be working at McKinsey. You might be working at BCG or Bain & Co. But they're still going to be like, oh, well, this is Meta. This is Google. If you want to work here, then this is how we're going to operate. And it goes back to Tyler, what you said a long time ago, that when you get a job with one of these companies, they're so formidably important to the ecosystem of software tech, that they definitely have a bit of that impetus to say these things because they know people will think twice and probably work really hard or harder to prove that they could handle it. But that also has an ugly side too, which is burnout, which is people being overworked and not really being productive enough. So I think there's two edges to that sword.
So this is Robert. All I can say is glad to see Candyland over, and welcome to the real world of work. So
I would agree.
let's
I
see.
would agree, Robert. I would agree 100%.
Yeah. Silicon Valley's been in a bit of a candy-colored cloud for since about 2011 or so. Yeah. Even going back to 2009, I would say. Yeah. Um,
Can I can I share a epiphany that I had recently? Hello,
oh
everyone.
boy, I know that voice.
Hey, Roy, welcome
Hello,
back.
long time no
Back, Roy.
see. Hey,
Time.
yeah, I just find this super interesting because let's say 6 months before, let's take it backwards. Um, a lot of tech companies in China has been kind of cut down and lay off people, and then and now we're seeing the kind of Google, Facebook going through the same cycle, and my kind of my observation to this phenomenon or this kind of downturn of the economy, reading from China's economy, is that for the tech companies, we're already past the golden age of investing in funding, and that's why there's a lot of kind of cut for the labors. At the same time, there's just not so much money out there for tech companies to play around, and that's why a lot of tech companies has to re-strategize their market. And another factor is that if you look at Tencent, Alibaba, and all these giants, they are mostly B2C, right? So business to consumers. And for past decades, we have invested a lot of effort and monies on acquiring these users. And now we're reaching to the peak of the consumers. So there's not much to acquire. And then what's next? Like we don't have we can get more users because we're already dominating the market. And what's next? We have to, cut some budget and then find other ways, find new product and new new kind of ways to make more money. And that's why tech companies are going down specifically in China. And now just take that reflection kind of half year ago, and now looking at big companies like YouTube and all these tech companies in Silicon Valley, I think, of course, we're going through this financial kind of downturn, but at the same time, we're kind of already past that golden age of tech companies, and now we have to rethink about what's next for these companies to go which consumer or which market they're trying to dominate, and what kind of new product they have to create in order to get new users. So I just find that interesting, and we will see more kind of slow down hiring and probably layoff overall in terms of economy. But I think the question to this large company is like, where do we go next if tech is not a big thing, and do we go with 3.0, or do we go blockchain or somewhere else? Like, which industry can we continue to dominate for these tech companies? So just share my 2 cents, but hey, good to see everyone.
Good to see you too. Okay, next up is Microsoft says a phishing campaign targeted more than 10,000 organizations by hijacking Office 365's authentication process, even on accounts using multi-factor authentication. Campaign that steals email that targeted at least 10,000 organizations.
And it's 10,000 organizations, not 10,000 users. We're talking about millions of affected end users. And all the organizations that have been targeted and victimized in this case is the ones that have been running Microsoft Active Directory in federated mode, where they have both service on the planet and in the cloud. These are the ones that have been vulnerable for these ones, you wonder.
Okay, next up, Twitter says roughly 1.5 billion tweets about gaming were made on Twitter in the first half of this year, now that the year is half over, up 36% since last year. Genshin Impact and Wordle were the most tweeted about games. Roughly 1.5 billion tweets about gaming. Okay, I guess we could have done that as a trivia question, but could have been a two-parter. We could have said which game was the most tweeted game. It doesn't surprise me on the Wordle side, because part of the appeal of Wordle is taking your result and tweeting it out to people to kind of social brag about how you scored. GeoGuessr is becoming quite a really cool game, but it doesn't have that aspect where you kind of brag to everybody how you did. Anyway, the next.
How many of these tweets were from bots?
Okay, right. So the next one is what now? Unity to merge with app monetization service called IronSource, valued at $4.4 billion in the all-stock deal. Silver Lake Sequoia will invest $1 billion in Unity after the merger. Update: the companies have confirmed the news. IronSource is being valued at $4.4 billion in the all-stock deal, so they're getting a whole bunch of Unity stock, $4.4 billion worth, to merge into Unity. And now Unity just added a monetization service, which is super interesting, because Unity is a creation platform for games and a lot more, and one of the companies in the best position to create metaverse-like experiences. Here's the quote. We believe the world is a better place with more successful creators in it. The combination of Unity and ironSource better supports creators of all sizes by giving them all the tools they need to create and grow successful apps in gaming and other consumer-facing verticals like e-commerce, says CEO of Unity. This is a step further toward realizing our vision of a fully integrated platform that helps creators in every step of their journey. We look forward to welcoming ironSource and the rest of the team to the Unity family. Really
Just a
interesting.
quick question: is it just me, or is Tyler's mic popping? I'm not sure.
It's just you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So Unity stock is down 16% today, 19% over the past 5 days. Yeah, that's a significant drop since it opened today, which, an hour or two ago. So the market didn't like it too much.
Is there a possibility, Tyler, that the gamers on Unity are worried about it being a crypto thing?
I don't
Because
know.
gamers notoriously don't like crypto.
I don't know. I would think Unity users would love this.
Yeah, any way to monetize, people love.
Right. I don't quite get it. Okay. The market cap of 9.8 billion. But what was the anyway? So the next big topic is the leaders of Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Meta, Google, and more than 500 businesses, education, and nonprofit companies urge U.S. states to boost computer science education. Oh, right. Well, that's kind of self-serving. They want more people to hire. They have a very difficult time finding all the talent that they want to hire, and that's one way to do it, is to increase the pipeline of talent for them to hire by teaching people earlier. But there's positive ways to cut that as well. That they want to keep the U.S. out ahead of things, and I'm sure the quotes are very positive. And let's pull one up. Here we go. At a time when every industry is impacted by digital technology, our schools should teach every student how technology works to learn how to be creators, not just consumers. The letter says. Instead, the basic skill is taught only to a lucky few, leaving most students behind, especially young women and students of color. Quote, today, computer science should be a core subject, just like basic biology or algebra. The United States has seen tremendous momentum behind this idea, and today's announcement makes it clear that the time for action is now. Bill Gates
I
was
hope these companies, I'm sorry, I hope these companies are sponsoring scholarships, particularly for women in STEM.
Bill Gates was among those who signed on the tooth and tweeted about how computer science changed the course of his life. And he says, when I was 13. Okay. Thank you. Good night. Other
Yeah, it's
signatures.
also about competitiveness, right? Because I think if you know how to do coding you can work from virtually from any parts of the world. And if the American children are not upskilling themselves in terms of computer science, I think they may lose out to the rest of the world.
Other signers include Amazon's Jeff Bezos and the new CEO Andy Jassy, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, Microsoft President Brad Smith, LA Clippers chairman Steve Ballmer, who was at Microsoft in the C-suite, Apple CEO Tim Cook, Apple CEO Sundar Pichai, Meta founder Mark Zuckerberg, and a rather impressive list.
You know what's so interesting is, again, good intentions, a bunch of males, and they actually could learn from Mackenzie Scott, who is less about making all these pledges and more about actually fucking doing something. But it sounds cute. I wish him well. But also back to the student needs to make the decision too. I mean, if you look at the percentage of our students who actually opt to do, I'm not anti-liberal arts and humanities, but if you look at the ratio of liberal arts to humanities to hard sciences, we got our challenges.
So as you're saying that, I'm thinking computer, I learned Java, for example, and we call Java a computer language, right? What languages do you know? So computer geeks will often say to each other, what languages do you program in? I
Example, C++.
C++ or Java or Perl or R or whatever, right? So the in thinking of them as languages, because in a weird way they're kind of like languages. They have a sort of grammar to them. I would say they're even, in a weird way, easier than learning most languages. Having being kind of multilingual myself, I would say that computer languages are in some ways simpler than human verbal languages. Anyway, but would it make sense? Most schools around the world emphasize learning other languages, right? So in the U.S., Spanish, French, German are kind of the default trifecta of languages that every, middle school and high school, force the students to choose one of those. Might it make more sense then to offer Java or some other Python or something, one of these really popular computer languages as an alternative to what we call a foreign language?
Yes and yes.
Yeah, Tyler, some of the states that are requiring financial literacy in adding that to their high school curriculums are allowing it to count for their foreign language requirement. Don't ask me why finances is a foreign language, but so similarly that the computer language should easily fall under that.
I
You
was
can,
going to say that the problem with that is that you can say mathematics is a language, for example, and some people are talented at languages and some people are not talented at languages. But oftentimes it depends on the teacher and the nature of the project. And so I would say that as anyone who does program knows, is that it's really about logic, and it's really about
Yes.
being good at logic and having a great teacher or a massive interest because of your own personal desires. So if you look at most great coders are self-taught. They didn't learn it in school. They taught themselves because they wanted to write a program for a specific function. And so, in my experience dealing with these super coders, they are very self motivated and they are extremely, um, it is, when you speak to them, there is an input output context. They think differently to liberal arts types of people. So I do feel like you have people that are naturally good at languages, people are naturally
Yeah,
programmers
but Nicholas, that's
in a
not
way.
mutually exclusive to giving credit for that. That's just a different observation. That's not mutually exclusive. You can still give them foreign language credit for it. It doesn't deter
Oh no, I
them doing it
agree.
on
I
their
think
own.
it's a great thing, but I believe that low code will supersede that in time. So
I
I got
think I
my
think a
comment here would
mathematical
be
mind is mathematical mind, as Nicholas mentioned, is actually quite important for when you're doing programming. I mean that's how I feel, because there's always a lot of logic, right, in there. So that brings me to one question: Does people in America like mathematics?
couple of
To
thoughts
Nicholas's
here.
point, there are a lot of bad teachers.
Yeah, still about how you teach it. Actually, I think for children, the understanding of language will influence the understanding of mathematics. So, first of all, you have to have good ability in language, and then you can.
Mathematics, people in America invented math anxiety.
American innovation.
Well, it's interesting. While we were talking, I looked up, I live in an area with a very good school system. I looked up the local high school, and they have a technology department. They don't have much information about what's there. But the very fancy private school, the Eastwood School, offers a whole program, and they teach coding and they support it and enrich it for their students. I think it really is a grassroots issue. You can't produce people who can do this until you have an infrastructure in place to do it. And we don't really have that. The people, even in good schools, they're using 10-year-old computers.
Hey, Tyler,
Yeah.
are you there?
Yep.
You are a maths teacher as well as an English teacher, right? What do you think?
I wasn't an English teacher. I taught a computer class in South Central Los Angeles. And I started out, I had to create my own curriculum. And I felt like my personal goal for the class was to get them just far enough to uh, get them excited to learn more on their own. As Nicholas was saying, like people become very self-taught in this regard. But you can, I think, get many people to light up and get them on, help them with the first step and the second step, the first little baby steps for many of those folks to get them on a path to, because for a lot of folks, especially in South Central Los Angeles, they're not exposed to that path at any point. And I just want to let them know that path exists, and here it is right over here, and here let's take we're not even going to walk down it fully properly. You're going to have to do that on your own if you feel like that's the path you want to go down. But I just want to let you know where it is so that you can decide for yourself if you want to go down it, and just help them get the first little taste of it.
You know what, Tyler? One of these days, and I look forward to having a bourbon with you to discuss that particular journey that you had with
Yeah,
computer science in South Central. And I really mean that.
yeah,
On
It
a
sounds like it
separate,
would make for a great movie, right?
that's what I'm
Hollywood
talking about.
blockbuster right there.
You just got to get a great theme song. But the other thing that I'll tell you, and I was a horrible programmer, and I took it in high school and I took it in college, and I sucked. And I was there when we actually had, you guys remember those little cards you had to put in the machine and they had to be in order and everything like that? But I will tell you what programming did for me. And again, I don't remember much of anything, but I was back when you used COBOL and Pascal. What it did for me in business, I took what I learned there, the if then, if what, so this, the flow charting, and I used that in my negotiations my whole career and how to evaluate people, how to evaluate clients, how to develop business. So though I never became a coder, that logic and that process did wonders for me. And keep in mind, I'm a guy who retired 7 years ago at 50. So I really believe in, if you don't use the coding, it definitely can help you in a lot of other things.
Logic thinking.
yeah. The logic bit's huge, but as Nicholas says, like some people are in a weird way wired where it feels very natural. And I love the point that he made about really hardcore supercoders even start to conversate with humans in a kind of unique way.
Geeky.
Well, yeah, we call them geeks, but they have a very binary style of speaking. I started doing that where I only ask questions that have one word answers. Every question I ask has a yes or no answer, and
Close ended.
yeah, it's very indicative. It's because I don't want them to go on tangents one way or the other. I'm asking my questions in very precise ways because I want a precise answer, and it forces the listener to think in a very computer programming like way. Anyway, but there's also yeah, I wonder to what degree we should inflict that on people like creatives who uh, operate in a very opposing, multicolored, rainbow-like uh, mind state where things are never black and white, and you don't necessarily want to force Paul McCartney to start thinking like a computer programmer. It might have negative impacts on his ability to write songs. So
There's also the
Well,
fact that the
Tyler,
idea that
I
a human can compete with an AI, which will write in future, is almost zero. I mean, really. So, learning it is a bit late.
Yeah, but
Tyler,
if we don't do
I've got a
something,
slightly different.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going
Tyler,
to say, if we don't do something now, I get everybody talks about the leap for AI, but we got tons of humans that need to learn something, and AI may not always be the answer, and it may be an answer a little bit further along the way, but we still need to train a ton of people.
So I've got a slightly different feeling for it, personally. I mean, it's a little bit about logic, but ultimately it becomes about clarity of expression. Most of the things that I sweated blood over when making the courses that now over 1 million people have taken is about how a human can express their intention perfectly clearly to a computer. So it comes down to precisely how you name things and how you unambiguously put across what you want to happen. In the way it's a subtle mindset to get across, but it's less about. Somebody said that the hardest problems in computer science are naming and cache invalidation. Cache invalidation is kind of boring. That's just like if you store a copy of something, then you set yourself up for problems. I personally hate copy and paste in business. In our business, we have one place for everything in its place, very little duplication. Where possible, that's one thing, and that's kind of dull. But the really hard thing is, what am I going to name this thing? And how do I make sure that what I intend this thing to do, it actually does, so that we get our tidings done for us. So yeah, it's just another angle on it. That's the hardest thing, in my opinion.
Ty-
Dr.
Tyler,
Francine,
things must
Tyler,
have
to
really changed since
Dr.
I was a
Francine.
kid
Mhm.
because I was taught logic in high school, and then I was taught logic again in college, and so when I started to code, when I started to learn to code, which I did, and by the way, I discovered I was a bad coder because I have ADD, and that's hard. You need concentration to code. But we stopped. I guess we've stopped teaching kids logic and math. Why?
Dr. Francine, I think I might have a one-word answer for you, shockingly enough. Pedagogy. Pedagogy has been forgotten when it comes to the education system. What you're describing is what I went through and what inspired me to go up to calculus. And actually, when I did study coding, I actually fell in love with it because I understood the logic. But to Ben's point and to what you're stating, the challenge is in the pedagogy. There's 7 different types of learners, and you can't just package it up and expect one person to learn. You can't expect everyone to learn the same way. And most people have 2 or 3 different learning styles. I've done ID for a number of tech projects, and I find that it's very interesting how different committees and different units in the organization, they process the same material differently, which is why you need change and transformation inside these system implementations, because the tech will understand it one way. The business department will understand it another way. The finance department will understand it another way. The HR department will understand it another way. The creative department will understand it another way. So it's
Yeah, I did
pedagogy.
25 years of
It's pedagogy.
translating
Yeah, it's
translating
pedagogy.
from engineering to the business side in tech startups. I, I was the universal translator from geek to human, so I know what you're saying. But
So,
it really is
I think
amazing
I think you're
that they
right,
don't
Doc.
teach it.
and I
I think you're
think
right.
we shouldn't also expect that we all have the same interest, right? So, I mean, we all have a very different passion and interest. Yes, I did coding for a while and I moved to do something else. And I have different interest and passion for both. So I think a lot of people have, and thank God for that. We don't want to be all monotonous and become coders. The world needs so much variety. So I think it really depends.
I want to answer
Nicholas?
Dr. Fran's point, if you can hear me.
Yeah,
Yes, it's Dr. Francine, by the way.
go
I
ahead.
know that's the second time I've been called Dr. Fran. I take it as a great compliment.
Vice versa.
Nicholas, go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to say, what happened to maths in schools was first calculators And then you can say, what happened to logic? It got outsourced to cheaper, faster, better computational elements. And it's much in the same way that if you gave most teenagers a map at this point, they would, without GPS, they cannot navigate where they're going. So I often say, here's a map. Try and get, they're like, which way up does it go? How do I use the reference in the bag? How do I do the coordinates? They're not thinking in that way, so they're losing like muscle memory. And that's why I gave my answer about AI versus coding, because that muscle memory will only go to people that have a deep passion because they think like this already. The reason why they're good coders is because they think like machines, just like Tyler said. And my original point is, I call one of my programmers, when he's being exceptionally in this mode, I call him .io. I'm like, you're in IO at this moment in time, is you're not communicating with me, and we've got the system says no, and I need you to talk to me like a human, because we need to get out of this input output. You're misunderstanding me because you're in a different mode, and so the inputs that are coming in are corrupting your outputs. And that's where Francine says, and that's the role I play, is I'm also a technical translator in many fields, in finance and in technology. That's sort of where I sit. And that's where fintech people should sit. And I am not the lead developer, but it's the ability to understand and then to know where the IO individuals are going. And so that's my personal experience, plus what I think is going to happen, because cheaper, faster, better will always replace those people who are not naturally suited for an input-output environment that is always binary, because a computer can't have anything other than a yes, no. There's no maybe answers in computing. And so you have to be good at asking questions that give you an input and output. And then to Ben's point, the beauty of identity, why do I love identity? Because words have power, and what's in a name, a name is a name, Rose, etc., and the Shakespearean ideas, these are old ideas. And so naming protocols and identity protocols are all about how do you set these systems up so that you can ask questions and get verifiable truth back. The real leap is to understand that the innovation that is going to win is going to be the internet will become the true net. So if I was trying to explain all of these things that are evolving, to get to a true net, you need a fantastic naming protocol.
Do you know something, Nicholas and Ben and everybody? It just popped into my mind that maybe the reason the world is so polarized now is that we've had generations of kids taught to think in binaries when the world is really much more complicated than that.
Makes sense. That because one of the issues is always divisiveness, and people can only see me, you, this my issue.
Me and mine, you and yours. So the binary that we've gone into is the haves and the have-nots, and the conditions of those binaries that we live in is time and space, and this new feature of the modern world called, money, right? So there is a value exchange going on at all times, and there is a computational cost, which is the conservation of energy principle, where you've got a calorific intake for a human that needs food, shelter, etc., to be a functioning unit of the economy, because that's what they are. And therefore, you get decision making that works on a basic evolutionary basis, which is fitness versus truth. The calculator is the fittest decision. You can be the greatest mental, arithmetic person, but the truth is you're going to use a calculator, and then the truth is you're going to use a computer, and then the truth is you're going to use AI. So, sorry, not the truth, the fitness decision, not the truth. The truth is whatever you decide to tell yourself. And so all the nuance gets lost because the hierarchy of decisions is prompted by an efficiency metric. And so it is much easier to mimetically outsource your thinking to I follow Elon, I follow Donald, I follow Hillary, right? And then you don't have to think for yourself because you can then conserve energy. And so we live in a world of hormesis, pain that we go through that doesn't kill us, that makes us stronger, and mimesis, where we follow people blindly down alleys that simplify our computational cost based on our need to conserve energy as priced in.
And what that has translated to in education is the mentality that we produce products at the end of it, people who can join the workforce or do whatever or not, or who will go to university or will go to whatever, but not thinkers or curious minds. We've forgotten the real purpose of educating in developing minds, developing ways of thinking, developing a sound human basis from which we can grow and expand into the future. We think of the end product, and teacher colleges just became let's churn out teachers' numbers, not really caring what they learned or how they learned it. So you had a whole generation or more of teachers who weren't necessarily interested in building minds and forming young human beings, but in producing just people who can graduate and so on. They weren't taught the right things to teach in schools.
That's the
So
fitness
the whole
function, Pat.
system failed.
That's the fitness function. The fitness function when the boundaries are time and space and it's priced in money is exactly what it causes this. Time has become much more precious. Time is being compressed. That's what's happening. And so the pedagogy of the past is does not it's not possible because the pedagogue has to survive, right? And the pedagogue has to survive by applying his talents or her talents in such a way that they get to own time. Like Robert said, he retired at 50. He owns time, and he can use the rest of his life to do things that he wants to do. But first, you have to own time.
Exactly. Hey, the other thing, Ed, is from a government, any government, don't we seek, if you're a government, you seek stability and a level of conformity. And if you're seeking stability and conformity, how much do you really want people to think independently?
Governments are
Exactly.
people. They don't think that way.
The trend is your friend. You want to divide the cell. That we are biological creatures. The cell divides naturally, and so the whole idea of politics is to create ideology that creates separation and polarization in order that you can simplify the governing process. Which is why I think we discussed this before. In America, you've got three dividing issues. Pro-life, pro-choice, pro-immigration, anti-immigration, and Second Amendment. You can divide the cell on the basis of three questions, which is exactly to Tyler's point about yes/no binary answers. Can you vote for the Republicans if you are, staunchly pro-choice, or can you vote for the Democrats if you're staunchly pro-life? No. The answer is in binary, no. And that sorts the population into rank order decisions about the things they care about most: reproductive rights, being an anti immigration person, being a gun holder because you don't trust the government. Whichever it is, those are the questions that are asked of our nations. So the narratives are designed to simplify the questions so that you get mimetic power driven structures. And that's where nuance is lost because the processing of information is so, it's so against the conservation of energy principle for people who are living in the trauma loop. This
So
is
how
our human condition.
Absolutely. So how did we get here though? In the situation we are speaking from now in 2022,
Economics, that's it.
what
It's
was the
just pure
trigger?
economics. It's
Where
economics.
do you
It's
take that back to?
1776.
Okay.
1776 is the trigger date of the beginning of economics, where corporations are incorporated. They're called corporations. That corporal. They are embodied, right? So once you have an idea of economics which incorporates the collective, but the capital and the labor is separated, you move into a time-space continuum that is bounded by money as an exchange for energy. We are exchanging energy, and the energy cost is the cost of shelter, the cost of the cost of healthcare, and the cost of calorific foods, which is why we have cheaper and cheaper, high cost calorific foods. So you're rich if you can eat well. You're rich if you can avoid, sugary snacks, right? All of those things are behavioral, and they are all coming through the lens of a time, space, money, energy continuum. That's how it works.
Why doesn't it even go further back than that, Nicholas? Maybe even to the first round of world
It
journey there
goes back.
was on a
Yeah, of
boat?
course, it goes all the way back to the ancients of nations and tribes. So all of the formation stories of family, Abraham and his family, and then the split between Ishmael, and that takes you into another family, and those families become tribes, and then those tribes become nations, and then those nations become states, and then those states elect for the separation of powers. So it starts with religion, which is the first organizing principle, and then it moves through time and organization, which comes through language and naming protocols that takes you to the next destination, which is where we are today, where misinformation and disinformation separates us, and people have an inability to see the truth because they do not know who to trust or the information that informs the information field. And that information field has expanded by the force multiplier that is Moore's law, which is the computational power which we are living within since the invention of the chip, and Metcalfe's law, which has exploded as we've now got cheap communications powered by voice over IP, which enables us to have conversations with 300 odd people or 2,000 people who've been in this room and heard the words that we have put into the information field. So, words have power, and, the next step is to try to own the information field of, by, and for the people. Everything else is, commentary.
That's why I say the hardest job in computer science is naming. It is literally, during the production of some of our courses, I would sit down with my fellow, Cambridge computer scientist friend and spend 2 hours working how to name a function so that students didn't make the wrong assumption about what that does. It's a bit like spending that long over your headline. If something says it's going to do something, number one, how do we name it such that it really does what you assume it's going to do without having to look? And then number two, how do you keep honest to that over the long term? Which sounds very much like a manifesto, a politician's manifesto, but in the case of just like naming something in a piece of code, it's much more important than we give it credit for.
No,
Don't you
naming
think?
is everything. Identity is a name you call me, a name I call myself, right? Me is a name I call myself. And that name is not unique even. There are other Nicholas, I'm not saying my surname, but there are other, there are other Nicholases, there are other Bens, and we define ourselves based on what we attach to our identity. So the naming process is Nicholas dot speaking on Clubhouse dot, that's how it works. So everything comes, naming is just another way of saying words. Words are what took us from being cavemen to being cooperators and collaborators. When you can cooperate and collaborate at scale, and you can harness the powers of computing that you own and control, you suddenly have the desire that you don't need to think about working. You need to think about, what am I going to do with my time? Because I can be housed, and I can be fed, and I can be educated, and I can be healed, because we are no longer laboring under the misapprehension that we have a scarcity of capability. We have an abundance, we just don't share it very well. And you can go and live somewhere else if we could become meta to the nation state. But we are competing, like the start of this call, I was talking to you about why the dollar is so important and why those Bitcoiners were so misinformed in thinking that they were going to replace the dollar with a, $1 trillion asset. It's not what that does. What Bitcoin does is enable us to realize that we can have trustless, permissionless, immutable networks that we can share that don't need a centralized intermediary like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Bank of America, JP Morgan, etc. That's what Satoshi innovated. That's the point. And if we can all grok that, we can move forward, because we can use this technology just like we use the calculator, just like we use the computer, just like we're going to use AI. The question is, do you want it to be private AI controlled by your friendly billionaire, or do you want it to be public AI accountable to the rest of humanity and maintained by humanity as free, open source, public infrastructure, the true net, the internet that is of value, that is based on identity, human identity?
So I'd like to add complexity to this by just asking that in addition to everything that we've discussed that is very complicated, there's also a question of what does 2035 look like? What does 2050 look like? And what do we need to do now to be prepared for it? and what should we ignore because it's a distraction? Like what you said about
Ignore the
the
narratives and understand there's three possible outcomes. There's surveillance states where they own the information field in nation state format where you have no rights, or there is a technocracy of billionaires who own the information field and are controlled by the invisible hand that is the political class that is craven to money, that is paid to lobbyists that distort our entire ability to do this. Or there is a third way, and that is public, open source, free open source infrastructure that we all own. I don't care who comes up with the answer, but the people who can think through this, who understand that this is the logical outcome, have heard Putin say this, have seen Xi do this, have seen the ineptitude of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden to lead us into this new world. This is the opportunity for us all to say, if this is mathematics, and there was someone in the back channel saying, let's talk about God. God is information, right? It's just different ways of passing that information. And so if you want to have godlike powers, you will embrace the idea that you can evolve into providing all of the same software and all of the evolved security and share it amongst us all, because we can all be part of that system. All we have to do is lead, and then others will follow, and then it will grow. That's what Satoshi showed us as well, that you can build on the basis of the mathematics. It's attractive.
But Nicholas, so Satoshi may have come up with that and had the idea of the decentralization, but that's not where we are currently, right? He wasn't even managed to get that. So who is going to be the one who is going to implement this decentralized
Us.
open
We are going
source?
to evolve.
But
This is
when
what
you
we're
say
evolving.
us, who is
No, this is
us?
what I'm doing. That's what I'm working on. That's what 13,000 other people, that's what the lead developer, Mike Totogi, who built .NET for Bill Gates, who built the Windows 95 kernel for the CPU to become Moore's Law's force multiplier. It was built by regular people like Edison, like Pasteur, like Fleming, like everybody has a team of people. There is a leader in our community. I'm not the leader who is the lead developer, but the community has come together to innovate and create public infrastructure that is free open source software. And that enables us all to leverage this science, let's call it, right? Let's not call it cryptography. Let's not call it cryptocurrency. Let's understand that Satoshi is like Edison. He is like Pasteur. He is like Fleming. He shows us that there is a way that it is possible for us to remove the centralized intermediary that was interposed by the economics of 1776 and the incorporation of the organizing effects of capital. The organizing effects of capital are that you can buy labor at the marginal cost, the calorific cost, the educational cost, the housing cost. And we talked about a wage price spiral. The reason why you get a wage price spiral is because the cost of education, the cost of housing, the cost of healing is so great in America that it destroys and it becomes corrosive because there's no time to be pedagogy. The way where pedagogy used to start was with the parents. But parents have to have the time to sit with the children. And the greatest privilege of having money and consciousness should be to educate one's own children. And that's, what we've lost. And we've lost the ability to effectively do that. Now, we can get that time back and pedagogy can return. There's nothing stopping us.
But okay, here is my question, that even identifying those people and finding out who legitimately is doing that is even a challenge by in itself, because as you know, there has been so much fraud happening everywhere throughout the world. So now governments, that we can't depend on them. There isn't any good regulatory framework that's
That's
having
right.
oversight.
That's right.
So we
That's right. So
even
that's
people,
when, that's what
can
lead
I
development,
finish,
sorry.
Nicholas? So I'm just saying that even with that, even people coming out from the education perspective, from the trade perspective, all we are learning is, well, I'm pretty sure you are aware of the South African that got caught up with 1.7 billion fraud, right? Bitcoin fraud and other things. So it is very difficult even for the geeks, let alone for the normal person. So how do we get there? That's the fundamental
This is
question.
this. So that you're again, we're talking at different levels, at micro, macro, meta. There are going to be fraudsters that take advantage of people always. Our whole economic system, you could point at Enron, you could point at Arthur Andersen, you could point at the million people that have broken the trust. The whole point of
Did we lose
is
Nicholas?
that you can go to the meta level and you can trust.
Did we lose him again?
Talking about Bitcoin, the reward. I'm talking about the
Nicholas, you're
innovation of
intermittent.
this.
Nicholas, you
Sorry,
are in and out.
sorry.
You once you have a better reception, you can come back again to continue. Tyler, you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
Great.
I've
Oh,
got a fun little point of
go ahead,
if
Chris.
they're concerned that 5% of the population is being trained with computer science and they're saying they're still able to extract, go to Google and make 200 grand, 500 grand if you're doing AI, and they're just tired of paying so much. And they're just saying, hey, public government, USA, can you just pay for all these people for us? We'd rather not spend that on internally.
It's exactly right. The
Right on.
problem is you've got to compete with, if I'm a blockchain developer, they were getting $300,000 starting, and going up. And it's just impossible for a public to compete with that. So these are the challenges that when you live in a world boundaried by economics. So I want to answer Messi's question. The innovation is different to the scammers that who see the innovation but don't see how they should use it. These are like any tool. You can use any tool for good or for bad. You can use a gun to defend. You can use a gun to attack. So we have to acknowledge these things. These are realities. What we can do, and the whole point of the innovation, is to be able to verify self-evidently. So the problem that we have in the breakdown of our societies is on the basis that we have a Declaration of Independence that says we hold these truths to be self-evident. But when you live in the post-truth world and the post-trust world, truth is not self-evident. It's self-evidently not self-evident because we know that there's all these narratives that we don't know what the hell's going on. Well, that's misinformation and disinformation. So if we want to have a future where we can be independent and collective at the same time, me and we have to have ways of getting self-evident truth back so that we can again say we hold these truths to be self-evident, and then we can come to consensus, which is how society makes decisions, and that consensus can be based on informed consent, or informed knowledge, and that's the information field. So there is a way to become coherent, but it is going to take time, and there will be people who will exploit their asymmetric knowledge and the willingness of people to follow mimetically people that sound very convincing. And all of these people in crypto are very good salespeople because they'll just sell you what you want to hear, but they're not ever going to tell you the complexity of what's what, because most people don't want to hear it.
So the next big topic is TikTok unveils content levels, a system to classify content similar to age ratings in films, and plans to let users block videos with certain words or hashtags.
I don't like anything that disagrees with me. Can I just make sure that it never happens ever?
Can we
That's
make him a Vogue
Admin
filter?
privileges on these hashtags.
that's a pro version. You're gonna have to pay for
Chris,
that.
you already have that. It's
That's
called
the
peer
enterprise
review.
edition.
That's in the metaverse.
Is there like I know there's like you end up having you got the personal version, and then you've got the prosumer version, you got like the enterprise edition. Is there like a new class for like just saying, look, we'll sell your entire user base to you? Like is there like a version, like a sellout edition level, class level? Because I'm starting to feel a lot of businesses are based around that premium tier up there.
The next is from the Financial Times. They say they have sources that Snapchat is exploring plans to let NFT artists showcase their designs as augmented reality filters on Snapchat. The test will start at the end of August.
These places always say they have sources. It's really suspicious because, by my experience, most of these things go just off one source and they don't even verify that. Why sources?
Right. Source. Why not source? Yeah. Um, NFT artists to showcase their design.
Because journalisms are informed by plausible deniability. So you can't have a single source because you would lose, you could have a single source if they were revealed. But if they're anonymous sources, you have to have more than one so that you have plausible deniability.
So the next is the Truecaller, which I consider friends. They're based in Stockholm. Launches, although their main market is India, and it's one of the top 5 apps in all of India. So yes, it's tremendously popular. Truecaller launches something called Open Doors, a Clubhouse-like app which lets users register with their phone numbers and audio chat with their contacts who have the app.
They
Okay.
have had the text chat for quite a while now. So yeah, this is probably the next step.
Remember push to talk and that whole thing around push to talk? This is really just the update of push to talk.
What else here?
It's in fact like the inverse of this, right? So we all sit on mute and then we jump in. So that's like push to talk. We've decided to be in this room. If you want to say something, you push the button, you go off mute, and you talk.
So Match Group, which we talked about yesterday, is kind of the biggest player in the dating app space. They own quite a lot of dating apps, including Tinder. They're expanding a partnership with Garbo, which was a partnership they did with Tinder users earlier this year, a few months ago, to do background checks on the users. And it allowed some users to do background checks on other users, as I recall. Anyway, they're expanding their partnership with Garbo to offer background checks to users on on Match.com and other dating apps in their portfolio of dating.
So flash forward, geofencing. All the people that showed up at the January 6th, stuff with things. Obviously, you don't want to date a secessionist because that's that gets you on FBI lists. Let's expand it out. Maybe you want someone that essentially has certain ways of doing things. So geofence all the people who have been to abortion clinics or churches or mosques. You just extend it out literally where, and it's not even where you go currently or what apps you currently have on your phone. It's where you've been over the last 20 years with some random, I installed a weather app on my phone at some point, or maybe it just came shipped from the manufacturer. Your entire life history as a geotrace, retroactively analyzed, these background tracks and stuff, being able to actually get those data sets agglomerated and then use that to filter, not based upon whether or not you're a threat to the state or whether or not essentially you're a threat to other people in a living situation, but whether or not your sexuality is essentially now something that is just sortable by an algorithm. Now, we don't think a whole lot about this right now, but historically, this has driven a shocking amount of human events. And I find it very disturbing that we have very little of that historical guidance now, as we're starting to just randomly hand these things over to algorithms and do this automatically. This is going to have a lot darker implications long term if we don't nip it in the bud. But I see us barreling forward to its full speed because a temporary boost to perceived security is going to be essentially the thing that everyone goes for.
As we know, if you wanted to create an identity, that's what it is. It's a dating identity that is based on probably your financial data, probably your social data, and probably your health data. Those would be the 3 fields that everybody would want to know if they were trying to remove the gap in all relationships, which is trust. You build trust over time. If you have verified information, you can build trust very quickly. That's how you can collaborate and cooperate at scale. So identity is what they're talking about, and it's just that they're addressing the market that they own, which Barry Diller built very well, and they own the matching market, and they've got a good name, right? And they're data matching for what people think that they want. That's the funny thing, is that people think that they want, someone like themselves, but the funny thing is most people usually match on the absence of those features that you wish that you did have, or you honestly would have. So you will lose some of the kismet of that. So all of that information is just information that's in the field that can be proven, and that if you want that verified service, you can pay them, or you could pay each other, and you can maintain those services yourself. That's the good example of the corporate surveillance mode, and that the reason why people go for it is because it's much easier to swipe than it is to go and meet people, and that's why people don't go to bars and they don't get exposed to those environments as much. And it's going to get basically to become part of normal daily life. People used to say, "I'd never marry someone from off the internet." Now a giant proportion of marriages are coming from people meeting online. So it's people are going to say, "Oh, I won't do that," but I think, as it was Chris just said, this is going to happen, whether you like it or not, because there's an economic fitness function, and people will say, "Oh, I'm going to invest in Match.com because, and I'm going to follow Barry Diller's investments because he obviously gets the game, and he's going to obviously make a lot of money from those verified profiles for his shareholders."
Okay, next up. China approves publishing licenses for 67 more online game titles. And this is the third
Well,
batch
that's interesting.
of 2022, but Tencent and NetEase Games again failed to make the list. Those were two of the biggest games.
Wow. That is a huge market segment they just lost out on, that they're being banned from.
Yeah. So it's amazing how tight of a control China has on the publishing of video games and how clearly concerned they are about video games.
Just a
And,
quick point I pointed out earlier, Tyler, you brought up the point of digital opium for the masses, that was a part of party literature, and you highlighted that a few months back or whatever. A little side note to that, it's worth considering when in USA where they're saying, how do we get more kids to study computer science? I can guarantee you almost every single kid that goes into essentially into computer science is because they want to make video games. If they're either forced to from someone else or they say, I want to make video games. If China's going and cutting out all of the video game stuff and saying only 3 hours a week, or clamping down on anything that doesn't be seen to party praises every other week, that's going to get to a certain thing that's going to suppress their long-term capability of developing advanced AI and a lot of the game engine stuff, because that is what a lot of those technologies are based on. The AI training modules are based on NVIDIA cards that were entirely made for gaming. The stuff we're doing for digital simulations and a lot of things for that are more exciting with Internet of Things, not of connect something randomly, but connect something from a specific spatial location. Those 3D engines entirely run on video game engines. So China suppressing that domestically is going to have very real ramifications for them 10, 15 years from now when those kids grow up and go, I don't feel like doing video games. It's not as much cool anyways.
Seems to me that their objective is to just show all these big companies who's the boss. And that
Sure, and they're being very
overrides,
effective at it.
well, I think that's just a priority that overrides any other priority longer term, because they see that as more of a threat than getting the benefits of letting them do whatever they're doing.
But if they're willing to trade the strategic advantage for being able to have like an army of AI coders or essentially VR people and all these other things they say that they want to have, this is going to come at that expense. And I don't think the party understands that relationship. I've been very, very impressed at seeing how nuanced a lot of China's policy has been when they say we want to go attack something, and how like they can say, oh, we're going to ban this behavior, we're going to do it in just this way. Especially, I almost wish we had the degree of competence in USA government. The thing is that the human rights whores of it means that they're using it in a very, very aggressive fashion that goes against human interests. But on this specific policy, I think they don't understand the relationship. I think that they're missing that competence, and maybe that's a very good thing. Maybe it means that essentially human rights actually have a future with things. But that's a
I
separate thing.
think I think in agreement with you. That's what I was alluding to about what does 2035 look like? Because actually grokking these things in a way that you can do the right thing now so that you benefit from it 10 years, 15 years from now is the essence of it. You could make a case that this country got it all right back in 1776 or whatever it was, and look, for 200 years we've been benefiting by that. And now everything is shifting towards digital. Who's going to get it right? And it's hard to grok it. And you look at these guys, and you're right, some of these decisions look really good. Some of our decisions look really good. But it's hard to see a particular entity, whether corporate or organizational or government, that seems to really, A, get it, and B, be preoccupied with it.
Okay. The next one is that the Magic Leap 2 mixed reality headset is coming on September 30th with a lighter, smaller design and a wider field of vision, starting at the very low price of $3,000, $3,300.
It's not for you. It's for the work from home folk or the folks that are going out to an oil rig and say, slap this on someone's head. It's cheaper than sending out someone else to train them. It's that market they're aiming at. Because that's the only market that actually bought it the last round. Everyone else bought games and they're like, it's too expensive.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the real question I would say is what kind of processor does it have? Because I think the last generation of these devices had kind of lackluster or anemic kind of acceleration, so there wasn't really much room for application innovation in the sense that everyone else was expecting. Because if you're hooked up to a PC, yeah, sure, you can draw some
Not with
beautiful
these. That's
things.
not accurate for Magic Leaps. They've always been essentially they're not tethered to a like a computer that like is on the wall, but you do wear one. It's not a matter of local processing power. That like it's that they're actually overbuilt in some in many regards.
No, I've used them actually, and I've coded them, and they're underwhelming. Some of them even have 32-bit processors. Like, what the hell is that? So it's unacceptable, I think. And so I think a big part of if you can actually get these kind of meeting apps running on something like that, hopefully this generation of chips are much better. Because I would love to use this in a lab, like
The
in a bio
majority of
lab.
the chips are just made for localization. You're basically the entire thing about it is just being able to maintain local spatial position and then be able to maintain 3D objects in those environments. That's a relatively slim set of requirements. The thing is that most of the actual applications that are generating revenue for the company do not require a whole lot more than that. The telepresence is a useful functionality that it requires essentially lower latency, but the actual interaction loops are not large. The thing is that when you're talking about like processing, like requiring like some beefy applications, what specific use cases are you thinking of?
So anything like what the videos where they showed, hey, look, you can have augmented reality to kind of show, turn the pipe this way, that kind of thing. That's actually really limited. And if you wanted to have anything be a little bit more dynamic, for example, for an oil rig, you would need a much more complex sandbox. And the capacity to support that sandbox, like that virtual reality or holodeck, as it were, that's the limiting factor, I would say, in this case.
Okay. I've actually worked on these specific applications where you can literally have 10 billion polygons like in a single mesh, where you're literally for the ones we were doing where we're like with construction equipment and stuff, and you can see every last little bolt, or theme parks where you can go and see like we could go inside the engines. It was like the ridiculous amount of detail. The way they're able to do that is you have a local streaming server, and essentially you're interpreting just from the local mesh. Sorry, so for people in the audience, the big problem essentially is there's this idea called edge computing about whether or not you put all of the computing power locally on the device, or whether or not you put it on a server that's just nearby, or you put it on a central server far away. This has a lot of ramifications for where we put our engineering effort. And one of the things that's challenging is that because the pattern goes between centralization and decentralization, and the pendulum swings back and forth about every 20 years, it's always a little bit confusing on which way it's going. For this particular application, they do have the ability to stream extremely large data sets, but the problem is that the compute resources for that are somewhat expensive, and there aren't many groups that are willing to pay for the custom R&D in order to port it to a platform that you only have a few thousand things for it. Magic Leap's only sold a few thousand of these headsets, like total. I
Exactly.
think
Imagine if they put in a stronger chipset, you could actually run maybe a Unity engine locally. That's that I would say that's the holy grail from my perspective for this to actually become useful. So
that's how you program it.
Yeah, I don't
What are
think
you?
that's the issue. I mean, the issue is there's not a use case for it that they've been able to develop. I mean, we've used this. The Magic Leap is just the Hololens is so much more superior, and even that finding a use case for it is difficult.
I mean, the military actually just canceled their contract with Microsoft, which
Oh,
is
they
rather.
did.
Yeah,
That was the
Gaudio, it
only
was
thing that
very
was going to
quiet.
keep it alive. So that
Yeah,
means
no, it just
HoloLens
was
3
good.
is dead probably.
Well, yeah, you saw what happened to Kitman. Kitman essentially was the guy that was running the whole Hollins program. They're like, well, there's a bunch of stuff in the background, but we ignored it. But now that he's no longer relevant because we don't see a future for the program, they let him go with things. So they're trying to launder it out to some Azure, like, cloud division to figure out what to do with this thing that Microsoft has put $12 billion or so into, some ridiculous sum of money. I don't know the exact number on this because some of this is secretive, but you can also infer from listings and talking to the right people. Microsoft has spent a fortune on this. I think that they've spent more money on the HoloLens than the United States government spent on the very first Apollo mission, which is worth worth referencing civilization wise what where our priorities are. When you look at the original military contracts for essentially for that Microsoft was hoping to save the program, there was all this stuff about how they could do training, and you look into the actual literature, the actual pitches they had in the military. It was like, imagine all from the makers of PowerPoint. Imagine being able to take all your existing PowerPoint content and put it in 3D and have soldiers where they can't look away with eye tracking. You can see if they're actually awake. And I'm like, oh God. And you can deliver it to them in the battlefield. It's like, no, this is going to get people killed. And
Yeah,
then you
I
see
mean,
like
you
these
see
training
that, and
videos.
you're impressed enough that you want to start development on it. But then you have it, and a week later, your developers all have it on. It's all sitting in the conference room, and nobody's
That
touching
is,
it anymore. The
yep.
same, the Magic Leap was. I mean, it just has to roll over and die. It's done. I mean, I know there's a Microsoft. The CEO now is a ex Microsoft VP. I'm actually surprised they came out with the new version. But at $3,300, I mean, just roll over.
They
You're
can't
done.
because they can't let it go because the Saudis have already doubled down on it. They essentially gave them a lifeline. They now own like 60% of the stuff. They magically was sold like 60-70% of their equity by now. The Saudis essentially did the last round, so they have to make something of it just out of a so someone's going to piss off some crown prince somewhere, and then it's like that's not a thing they can afford right now. So they have to find at least some market to save face.
Oh, that makes sense
Yeah,
But
but
then.
this is why I think the Quest 2 was such a great innovation, because I think there is a lot of subsidy going on there to make the hardware more affordable. And I think that in the same way that China iterated with solar panels very quickly and outcompeted American advanced technologies, in the
with
same way I
slaves,
think Quest 2 can outcompete its like the competition in terms of AR space. They're going to get to AR. They just started in VR, and it's much cheaper. The adoption rate is much higher. The cost to get in is much lower, like 10 times less, right? $300 versus 3,000. That's a no brainer right there.
it's a
Well,
different
it's not
use
a
case.
no-brainer. There's again, it's not being adopted to what you're. I mean, it's selling, but because it's cheap, but it's not a good. I mean, it's really not that good of a product.
It's a different use case. Virtual reality is really good for essentially doing a immersive where you want to like teleport someone to another world. The thing is for the augmented reality use case has always been something more about actually enhancing the world that you have around you. And there is fundamentally different use cases. You're going to be essentially isolated in a virtual reality environment. The ideal is completely blacked out windows. You're like, in a 10-foot by 10-foot cube that you can put anywhere in the world. An augmented reality use case that essentially is much more likely is going where you're almost like just walking down the street. You're in a factory walking around. You're in a public venue essentially, and like with a lot of data that's in the immediate environment. Those are going to be very, very different optimizations. Right now, the technology for localization at that scale, for being able to do localization, is somewhat limited. It's getting really good, but it's not quite ready. It'll be ready soon. The thing is that right now the virtual reality use case, they could say we can sell games, you can play Beat Saber, and if they can say that and you play it, it's like, okay, I get it. Like, it's a game for the kids, it's like the Nintendo system. All right, that's a use case that makes sense. The problem is that the augmented reality group has always attracted the airy fairy dreamer types, and so you end up getting the most wild, crazy, random things that don't really connect to anything. So it ends up being a marketing expense for like an R&D lab just to say, look, we're innovative, rather than here's an actual business case, use case you can solve. There's some really good work done in Orlando, essentially with the simulations conference down there. There's some other work being done in Houston for essentially the XR Forum. And there's also the Augmented Reality World Expo. Those are all three great places to see what actually is occurring in the field. The thing that's actually remarkable about augmented reality is that the technology is about 10, 20 years ahead of where the business cases are. And when you go to these demos, you go to these conferences, you see these technologies that frankly just mind blowing. but they can't articulate where it would actually be used. And for a lot of people that get attracted to the field, they get into it because it's the cool tech, not because they have an immediate problem to solve. So many of these are solutions in search of problems, and they bundle it up and hope that someone can figure it out for them. That's one of the failures of the developer program concept, is that they're counting on their customers to solve their business cases for them. And that's not how you build a scalable future. That's a great way of sharing R&D. It's a great way of doing research and development. It's a terrible way of building a multi-billion-dollar company.
This is, I understand what you're saying, but I think that it's always slowly, slowly, then all at once. And I think that if you look at the latest innovations where I've been following this, these guys who've got the contact lenses, and it's going to be, and we also know that Apple's launching the glasses, it's going to go augmented reality first, which is lighter and easier to use. It is, even with the Quest 2, it is hard to keep that on for a long period of time without it becoming, heavy and painful and giving headaches and all that sort of stuff. So it is clear that there's going to be an augmented version of the future. And I just had, as you were talking, an idea and thinking that if you had those contact lenses in that gave you the augmented picture, and they're pretty far down the track with this now, and you had its ability to connect to a watch or connect to a phone or whatever else, which is its computing arena rather than its visual cortex. And then you imagine that you close your eyes and it's like the theater curtains, and having the black screen, your eyes are really like the black screen. And that's what could take you into the virtual environment. And that suddenly seemed to me like a pretty cool way that you could see the technology evolving.
Right. So being able to block out the world versus being immersed in it, these actually are different philosophies, and they actually have different use cases. One of the newest features they actually have around the Magic Leap 2 that is not a functionality that any other headset on the market currently has is they actually have a variable dimming. So the idea of doing very much what you're describing, essentially of like blocking out the world, and it becomes more something that resembles more virtual reality as opposed to essentially augmented reality, and being able to flexibly move between them. Now, that adds significant cost and complexity to the manufacturing, but there is a reasonable assumption that that will be something that will be used, if only just for the case of I can walk outside and the thing is still useful and I can still see things. One of the things that's interesting for augmented reality as a challenge as opposed to virtual reality, with virtual reality, you can block out the entire world, and the only thing you need is tracking sensors to be able to figure out where you're at, and often that's optical. With
So
almost IMUs.
one of your words prompted me
Mhm.
to make a leap back to where we were talking about words having power and naming, and there was a slide in the Cambridge Analytica deck, which was where these technologies are being applied in attack vector, and it had a picture of a girl wearing headphones, the same girl, and it had two different taglines, two different strap lines. And one was let the world in, and the other one was block the world out. And it was trying to illustrate that there are two types of people, within the ocean framework that enable them to know how to speak to you. And that is exactly, so your words when you said block it out, that's exactly it. There's going to be people that open their world and those that block out. And I think it's much sooner than you would suspect, especially if you marry it to identity technology and the fact that you are worth a lot more when you cohere your data with your peers than you use the freemium model, which is the problem of the technology. The existing technocracy cannot it has to expose the fact that it's selling your data. And then when you have the ability to do this yourself, the question is the business model is not going to work for them, but the business model is going to work for us if we have a way to create network economies instead of network effects. And that's what I think the evolutionary leap will be. That's why I say it slowly at first, and then it leaps forward. If you can do it, people are going to opt into a people-powered solution, that's where the money is, in the data. And if you own it and we cohere it together and we own the systems that enable us to store it privately and provably and remote, and we've got the computing power at the CPU level, and we've got these contact lenses that enable you to be in or be out and be in virtual or be in augmented or be in that's really WebXR, right? Is that you are the unit of computing and you are a part of the system, and that you want to be able to own and control that system so that you're not subjected to the Chinese or you're not subjected to the Russian internet. You are a member of the the free world that has the superpower of all knowledge at your fingertips.
That reminds me of, and I don't know if you guys have seen Sherlock Holmes with Benedict. First of all, to temper people's understanding, the Mojo Vision again is not true AR. It's assisted reality. So first of all, just to get that out of the way, but there's an episode of Sherlock Holmes which, if you guys haven't seen it, I probably the smartest, most intellectual series ever. And there's a newspaper publisher, which I think they're trying to make as Murdoch, who's wearing contact or not actually glasses. That as you walk up to him, he gets a whole like portfolio of you, who you are, where you work, like your resume comes up on his screen. So as he's talking to Sherlock and Holmes, he's getting their dossier, he's getting all their information, and it makes you think. It's it's interesting episode for you guys to watch. It's really interesting. No privacy there at all.
Okay. So, a senior vice president at Google says that Google studies show younger users often use apps like Instagram and TikTok instead of Google search or maps for discovery purposes.
Uh-oh. That's not a good thing for your long-term projections there.
The
Long-term projections for those companies, hell yeah, that's great for TikTok.
TikTok threat to Google's business isn't just limited to YouTube, it turns out. Core
We
Google.
need to teach kids how to search in schools. It's a valuable skill because they keep them young.
Well, they're getting hit by Alexa as well. Like a lot of people search through Alexa via voice, and that's
Who
eating.
pays for the most for the most Chromebooks in school? They've got like an 80% lock on the market, and all their data goes to one stockpile. So they hit when they turn 18, they click a magic button, and then Google has a 15-year background on essentially people joining the system. They're going to have one of the richest data sets ever.
Then you've got social audio. By the way, if social audio ever takes off, and it doesn't matter who does it, Twitter or whoever. There was a new one launched today by my friends in Stockholm from Truecaller, by the way. But social audio, being a room full of humans, could be. And by the way, it's not only a room of 300 humans. It's a hallway of potentially hundreds.
Humanity.
Yeah, actually thousands of rooms, right? And you might, and I wonder if you have. I bet you have. I bet you've wondered what's going on with the Donald Trump this or the Elon Musk Twitter gate or the latest political thing that just happened. There was a moment not long ago, 2 months ago, where Twitter had Clubhouse had a massive spike, and I wonder if it was the beginning of the Ukraine invasion, where people thought, forget mainstream media. Clubhouse is. I'm probably better off going to Clubhouse to find out what's going on than by watching, CNN or whatever. I could be wrong, but I think that was the day.
We
No, no,
also had the
I
massive thing
think
for
Tyler,
COVID as
you're
well.
right about that because if you think about Piotr's room that he ran for
Right,
24/7 for all of those days, the advantage of that, he was able to bring people on who were actually Ukrainians who were in Ukraine. I mean, they were able to bring people on from the ground, so you were getting like really firsthand reports of
right,
what was going on. So I think that was what was kind of special about that.
The
right.
Imagine
James
if you
Webb
could
Telescope just the other
verify
day,
the
we had people
accuracy.
actually designed it that were on here. It was great. It's like this is like one of the best things about this platform I've never seen replicated elsewhere. If you host a subject about any subject you can imagine, will show up, and you say, "Hey, let's do an organized event with that." Within like a day or two, you can have the world's like most knowledgeable experts on any subject imaginable, and they'll bring their friends. Like that is the coolest thing ever. The signal to noise ratio is exceptionally high if you're willing to cultivate it. And I find in other platforms where there's a lot more noise, it's more difficult to have that sort of those sorts of interactions. So it's still something that has an extraordinary amount of value here in Clubhouse. I wish they essentially would cultivate that more intentionally rather than it being just like a random side effect of the way that they're building
But
stuff.
but
So
again,
when
remember,
when
if you had verified credentials for speakers, then you would get a much truer signal. Even so the beauty again of that identity or information field cohering is that you would know that that speaker really was in Ukraine, that that speaker really was qualified
to give opinion, and that the pictures and the audio and everything else that they could take could be tracked and traced to them, and that they could have signed that to be verifiably so. Think about the collaboration benefits of verifiable information with peer-to-peer reviews based on verified credentials. That's where we're going.
This is really
So
interesting that
my
you bring
question
up
is,
Piotr's room. The thing was here that I have been part of this with online chats and things since the beginning of time. I'm an old IRC admin, so I've been chatting the whole life since the beginning of the 90s. But the thing is here that you brought up this with noises in the back and the things, and you brought up Piotr's room. The most staggering moment in all my online presence over all these years was the night we shared together with the troops at Asvorsdal when they were under siege, where we heard the barrage, where we heard the explosions, and we heard the call out for medics. That is the most intense moment online I've had in my whole life, and that was going for 3 hours until his battery ran out in his phone. So yes, this platform and that room was remarkable. There were a couple of times there that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Johan Done.
so I'm just wondering from, data perspective and also, use cases. I don't know if they have been doing, but Tyler has been asking, what is the highest downloaded app, being TikTok and others. Why is not Clubhouse taking off, and why are not they are doing the best they could do? Because they are the blazers, and we all are here
Because
for
it's live
memes,
and it's
and then
long
there is a
form.
lag. So why are
It's live, it's long form, and people don't have the time because time is money. And so the format is not suited. The reason why Twitter is so powerful is it's limited in characters and therefore limited in time. And that's why people binge on Twitter and they don't binge on books.
Yeah, the limitation of time and space is what Clubhouse can't provide, like Twitter and TikTok. The interaction can be done and later, and then you can have this like interaction all over. So
No,
so?
but Clubhouse has two core problems. One of them Nicholas keeps identifying, so I don't want to get into it again. But identity really is important. This just when I signed up, everyone was supposed to use, and they stopped enforcing it. Your true name, your true profile, true picture. Now they let people put up memes, use phony names, so you've got that issue. And the second issue, now that we're on it, is one of my favorite issues, is their blocking feature. They're basically killing their own app because they gave everybody a nuclear missile to aim at each other people. Okay, and
It's not
so
just people;
everybody,
it's whole communities. It's crazy how powerful that thing is.
right? So people basically get blocked from rooms. Because somebody that blocked them on one room is now on a stage on another room, and like literally when you can't get into rooms and you can't see hallways, that's the end. Okay, but
Weaponizing.
despite the fact that there have been newspaper articles literally written on this, like even a year ago, the management of this app is oblivious, either oblivious or they're scared. They're
It's
scared
because
about
Andrew
like.
Horowitz literally the VCs were tired of having newspaper people come into their rooms, so they literally asked for that specifically to be a feature with things, and that was something that when you look at when they were spent a lot
yeah,
of time on the
sure.
platform, that was what explicit feature that they has their investment
No,
in.
I think it has more to do with this kind of culture that we have, particularly among, quite frankly, younger people, that everybody gets so easily offended, and the minute they're slightly offended, and things like whatever you want to call a microaggression, which is not a term that I even know from my youth. Okay, they block people, they complain. I actually know somebody who just got indefinitely suspended. Guy's a doctor, by the way. And it wasn't about vaccines, indefinitely suspended on this app. He doesn't even know why, by the way. They won't even tell him why. And I've been on a lot of rooms with him, and he never says anything offensive, but he's indefinitely suspended. Okay?
This is
Yeah,
what.
that
Yeah,
happened to me.
but
I
yeah,
was banned from the Ukraine room, and I could find out. I messaged everybody who was on stage, and everybody denied they had blocked me. But I could the whole time it was running, I couldn't get on it.
No, that happened to me also, as you know, we discussed it, and not at the beginning, but towards the end. But that was just that one room. This guy's been indefinitely suspended from all of Clubhouse. He had to create like a separate identity, and that's the whole joke about it. So basically, I know who he is. I mean, first of all, I know, okay, but he's got the same picture. He just changed his last name, but now he lost all his followers. So now he's operating with a different first name, same last name, same picture. He's still on Clubhouse. But I mean, and I asked him why that happened. And he says he was indefinitely suspended. He doesn't know why. They won't tell him. Okay, and I'm just telling you, I've been in so many rooms with this person, and I've never heard anything that would even remotely suggest that he should be suspended or anything. But that's their problem. When everyone's blocking everybody, they don't have a business, a concept that apparently they don't grasp. Okay, because that's what I think is going on a lot. I mean,
Well,
because
even just
obviously there's a lot less usage here than there was a year ago, and it's not just because the pandemic opened up.
another aspect of ostracism historically is the idea of having like something where when you banish someone from a community, often there's like a time lapse aspect to that where it's a you've done your time, you come back kind of thing. There's absolutely none of that concept in the way they've implemented. And like I think when Clubhouse isn't going to be around forever, eventually they're going to run out of VC money to burn. But I think they still have a few years left. But or maybe they get acquired, I don't know, we'll see what happens. But the one thing to consider is whatever happens with it, it's worth considering the things they did right on this platform. They also the things they screwed up. But how the block feature especially should be considered by anyone that does another platform in the future as something to not replicate because they did a really bad job with it.
So maybe I guess some of you were suggesting that there would be audio app coming up, or just Tyler just read news about the new one coming up. So maybe like any innovation, and then the invention comes in, and then the innovation improves on it. So I guess like Google Map did tremendous amazing things over the map quest or whatever it is, or Yahoo search wasn't getting anywhere, but Google did it. So maybe the next one will be a much better one than Clubhouse, trying to improve on it, I guess.
So, granted that social audio is not perfect, and there are a lot of ways that people have managed to exploit it and do all sort of weaponizing for blocks and all that stuff. I know, but there is a lot of positive sides to it, being on the spot, with the latest information, hearing it from people. There are a million rooms being open a day. That number is huge. I mean, don't just take the English language rooms, as an example. There are rooms in any language that you can think of on Clubhouse. The idea is so infectious, and that it's I'm seeing it happening elsewhere. The same kind of replication. I've seen it on Twitter. It's not the same kind of concept as the Clubhouse idea, but they do have something similar with spaces. This is also proliferating elsewhere as well. Facebook is trying to do something like it. They have something like it. It's not that successful. Even on Discord, you've got stages. Elsewhere, the idea is good. It's sound. The concept is fantastic. Being able to interact with the NASA chief scientist, on the spot, related to something that is happening right now, is something that cannot be underestimated no matter what we do. So I think there is future for this, and at some point it's going to take off, and I'm waiting for the time where I see that something like Clubhouse getting adopted by some big major player like maybe Google, because they suck on the social front completely. They have no footprint there. Taken, with someone with deep pockets, and take them to the next level where you'll be doing searches online and you'll be getting things like, do you wanna join this room that is actually talking about this right now with a world-renowned, person talking about it. And let's not kid ourselves. It takes you maybe 10 minutes listening to someone, maybe even less, to discern that this person actually knows what he's talking about, or he's just saying whatever that comes to mind. So I see a lot of value in this, and I think this is going to take off really in a big way. Hopefully, they'll be able to mitigate all these little nuisances that are coming from people abusing the platform, and the platform not catering to the persons of value that get blocked for some reason, or get like block campaigns against them or something like that. They need to be a little bit more smart in the way that they handle people, and make sure that the person, especially of value, is their most valuable asset, because the more good people you get on this platform, the more the platform is going to be valuable. It's a Metcalfe's law. Get more people on it, and you will get the platform will take off. Sorry, I took too long.
No, it's all good. A very brief point on Orkut with things. So in Brazil, Google essentially said, let's do a social network things. And it didn't work in most of the places in the world. It failed everywhere, except Brazil. And they
Yeah.
essentially had the zombie social network that essentially had like 30 million people or so on. It's like ridiculous. It's like a third or fourth population. And they were annoyed because they kept trying to kill it. And then Brazil kept saying, no, you can't kill this. It's too important to us. I'm not exactly sure what happened to it. I think they did end up retiring, or they turned it into something else. But the reason why it's relevant is I'm kind of predicting this is just a scenario that could happen with Clubhouse. Is it ends up being like surpassing, Twitter does their thing or whatever, like it ends up being retired all around the world, except there will be like, one random country, it'll be like
Orkut,
one
right?
region in India, and it becomes the 100% you cannot be a citizen unless you have a Clubhouse membership. I totally see that as a scenario that could happen here.
It could, and I don't want to switch this to social network or footprint for.
Sam, before you go on again, please fix your microphone because it's unbearable to listen to.
Your voice is lovely, just the mic.
Okay, is this better?
Yes, better.
Okay, so I don't want to switch this to a social network or social footprint discussion or part, but uh, Google has fantastic products, and they are great in some of the things that they're doing, but they have other areas where they are really horrible. One of them is their social footprint. They don't seem to get it, and no matter what they're trying, they keep failing and failing and failing. And another one is hardware, but that's another story. So they need to buy someone who is actually has the potential of getting somewhere. And I see, Clubhouse, and ironically, the company that owns Clubhouse is also called Alpha for some reason. I think they're a good candidate for something that they can take and not interfere with, allow it to grow organically by itself, just provide them with enough, financial support to keep them going and keep people coming, and then somehow get the content of, our rooms in some sort of transcripts, and allow people to search directly into it. I think that's going to be like a win-win for everybody. And again, sorry for my mic.
All right. So I've just got 5 quick tweets to get through, and then I want to hand it over to Ben, who just started 30 minutes ago a room. Did Ken, was that you trying to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly point out as the last point that a number of people who were regular contributors on this app, like Justin Higgins, have just moved off completely to their own podcast. And I know Steve Krohn's starting his own podcast. I know Alexander's starting a podcast. A lot of them are moving off, to their own podcasts so that they can control their content and monetize their own content. And if Clubhouse doesn't figure that out like real soon, there's not going to be anything, because Justin used to have those great rooms and he doesn't run them anymore. I mean, he's got his own podcast, and so anyway.
Okay. The BB found one from South China Morning Post about Chinese gamers. Tencent dashes kids' hopes for summer reprieve from game time limit. Tencent says there was a misunderstanding regarding online rumors that children will be allowed to play an hour a day during the summer.
Oh
You
God.
won't. You won't. You're not going to get that hour a day.
You have to go play outside in the wonderful smog-filled skies, where you have to
Yeah,
like, the good kids
right.
get essentially the indoor playgrounds. The poor kids, yeah, they just got to get cancer later with things. But yeah, go play outside, kids.
They learn. They must stay home and learn to code.
They got to learn to code. I guarantee you, I would bet money that China has mandatory learn to code now in schools.
The
That's
quality of coders you get from mandatory code to learn things is a very different quality you get from the people that are self-motivated. But the thing is,
true.
quantity has a quality all of its own.
Exactly my point, which is if you don't expose everybody to it, there's what percentage do we imagine of people who are exposed to it stick to it and become valuable coders? I don't know, some small, 3%, 1%, 2%, somewhere in that ballpark. So why not expose everybody to it briefly? Because by the way, isn't that what early stage education should be about at that around the high school, junior high school stage? 14 to 17, kids should be exposed to all kinds of stuff that they might not normally get exposed to, just in case, and it will stick with some percentage of them. Great. So force everyone to do one class for 10 weeks, and if they stick, great, and if not, that's fine. But at least the kids who it does stick with got exposed to it, because right now in the US, it's an incredibly small number of folks who are being exposed to it. And I imagine China's, I agree with your point, Chris, that like there's not really much point in exposing the other, 95%, 97% of people to it, because it's not going to stick. However, there are studies that say that learning kind of the principles of computer programming, the kind of logic that comes with it, is superior in some ways to math in doing what math sets out to do, which is to teach kind of logic based thinking.
I
So
You
think
know,
in
it's worth
China, the
pointing out that
tiger mums
China's
will
graduating a
enforce that,
million
not
engineers
the
per year.
government.
A million engineers per year is in a shockingly large quantity. When like you have like Obama when he was doing the teach kids to code thing, going, we can get 10,000 more engineers. This will be great. I mean, there is like a complete disconnect on conception of scale. And the thing is that literally one of the challenges that China is running into right now is they've literally built everything they can possibly build in most of their built up infrastructure areas. One of the reasons they're having to do Belt and Road initiatives is they don't have anything to do domestically. That's how built up many of these regions are. So they have to go and say, send them somewhere else to build things elsewhere in the world, and we can continue keeping this economic growth chain going. In America, we're having the thing of going, well, let's figure out what skills people may or may not use for the next, like 10, 20 years, but let's not actually train people in them. Let's go and essentially work with what we've got, and let's do incremental improvements so that essentially we can keep the average more or less where it's at. It's very much based around status quo. China's going, how much can we just throw at the wall and see what sticks? And that's a very different methodology, a very different conception of what's possible. When China says we want to essentially say additive 3D printing, they make sure that there's 3D printers in every single school mandatory and it's part of the curriculum. When America says as we want to do 3D printing, it's like, well, we'll have this as an after school program, maybe with some libraries, a few here, go hang out in the makerspace. And so you get just this radically different perception of what's possible. You also get a very different quality of essentially what people end up doing. Because in America you have to fight for your own education. The kids that end up actually getting through the system and actually having like a really like impressive amount of stuff, they had to really struggle to essentially go out and get those resources everywhere they were. They're available, but they're not like they're not something that they're just given to you. And the reason why that's different is that in China, the idea is no, wherever you start, you will have this mandatory education. It will have this. And where I think that's going to be really relevant is then this near future, as we're starting to look at these decoupling scenarios, you're going to have a different tech tree. It's not going to be this integrated thing where everything's like, crossing over. You've got American designed products that are manufactured in China and, sent on global markets. It's just going to be, we're going to start building very, very different things and they might not be compatible. And we're already starting to see the early versions of that sort of thing happen with like everything from the XR technologies to the AI. And now video games is going to be one more of those splits occurring.
I want to add some background information. Actually, in China, back in 2017, they already put Python to high school textbook. So, and in Shanghai, there's another one. It said the primary school purpose to learn programming language Python. So that means in
Smart.
Shanghai, yeah. So it's something already, implicated in that system already.
Okay.
Yeah, we're already working with old data when we're having these discussions. Like they're moving that fast.
Alrighty, here we go. Next up, Twitter was concerned that Elon Musk would build a competing app. Twitter said in a new lawsuit against Elon Musk that it was worried about how he would use the data he was demanding be handed over. And Thomas Tong found one that adding table salt to meals could cut more than a year off your life, a study finds. The people who often added salt to their meals had shorter life expectancies, higher BMIs, exercised less, and consumed more red meat. And Reuters reporting that 2 pig heart transplants succeed in brain-dead recipients. Surgeons at NYU have successfully transplanted genetically engineered pig hearts into 2 brain-dead people. I guess
I
as
should
they
point out NYU, the finest university in the world.
right. BB
I went there.
My alma mater too.
But
B,
previously, on a living so-called recipient, he passed away a few months later, right? So these two bodies are brain dead, right? So they still need to have the real clinical trials on real bodies, living bodies.
your volume is a bit low, Cheryl. BB found one from South China Morning Post that China's court China court AI. So Chinese courts are using AI, and now
You get a sentence. You get a sentence. Everyone gets a sentence.
the Chinese court AI reaches into every corner of justice system. The smart court's electronic abilities reach allows the system to access police files, prosecutor and government databases, and integrate with China's social credit system.
That thing is going to be such a hacking target. You saw what happened with the Shanghai server. Now imagine with that. Holy shit.
A Chinese law professor warns we must be alert to the erosion of judicial power by technology companies in capital.
And this system is called the systems of the systems. So it's called SOS, Smart Court SOS. And yeah, first of all, this name implies how it's above the uh, what the system right now. And another one is in the bottom of the article. Actually, I think this article is worth reading if you have. It will give you the ideas how they will use this AI system, this SOS system, to judge for the judge. And in the end, there's another called Zero Trust. It's an anti-corruption AI built by the Chinese Academy of Science. It's to monitor the government employees' social connections. So these two systems will be implemented in the worldwide system. Originally, because in China there are I forgot how many provinces there. So the systems are by province. That means they were no connections between each other. So the goal is to make all the cases into this big database, and this AI can learn and expect like 100,000 cases a day. So in the end, I'm not sure it's a good thing or bad thing. So that's why the aspect I want to hear about
Right.
you guys'
So
opinions. Yeah.
the last paragraph of the story says, and I just pinned it to the top of the room, that there's an anti-corruption AI built by the Chinese Academy of Sciences and they call it Zero Trust. What a great name! And wait until you hear what it does, and then I'll remind you what the name of it is. It's to monitor government employees' social connections to find out if you have social connections who might be unfriendly to the government, the CCP. And so if you are part of the CCP and you have social connections who are unfriendly to the CCP, well, this monitors for that because they don't want you having friends who aren't pro CCP, obviously. And again, I remind you, the name of this AI is called Zero Trust.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, no, no hide.
What a perfect name for that. That's genius. That's a genius name for that app.
But I mean, but Tyler, my question is about so have this AI, it analyzes at least 100,000 cases a day. So assuming it has more no average knowledge than the average judges. So yeah, maybe how about Chris? You have this how to
I'm not
think
sure
about.
what to think, but the zero trust has been deployed in some cities, triggering strong resistance from local officials. Yeah, no shit. Wow.
You're about to be not just replaced, but if you're not friendly, your entire personal life and all of your friends aren't friend if they aren't loyal enough. Oh man, they get purged. And by the way, corruption is a thing. They're always looking for excuses to purge that. So yeah, no shit, they're a little worried about that.
And by the way, it's already launched for 6 years. At first, it's just used as a database. Now, it's forced to, everybody, every judge, every prosecutor need
Oh
to
great, it's already been
give.
tested.
Yeah, already tested for 6 years. So right now, if you refuse to use the system, you have to write another report for why you refuse to accept the suggestion.
And
The
the
AI.
AI marks you as being unloyal.
Well, because I'm a Muslim and it's against my religion. Obviously, that's the
Well, no,
obvious.
no, no. But that's the beautiful part about this. An artificial intelligence system monitoring for party loyalty is saying the person that refuses to use the AI is not loyal to the party. And so there's an incentive now for the AI to mark everyone that is not loyal, so to build more AI to criticize it. That's amazing.
So BB found an article about the top ranked countries for remote working according to Bloomberg. And it says when it comes to picking best remote working destinations, tropical low cost locations like Bali or Bangkok might spring to mind. In fact, the European countries dominate Germany's top ranked country for remote working, followed by Denmark and the United States. Okay, and then let me retweet that for those who are going to ask for it later. Tomiko found one that Amazon launches a cancer vaccine clinical trial in partnership with Fred Hutchinson. Amazon is listed as a co-collaborator on a filing for an FDA-approved clinical trial which seeks to develop vaccines to treat breast and skin cancers. And Jeff G found one that the military is testing a weapon that aims to destroy electronics, but not the buildings that surround them. It's a weapon called the High-Powered Joint Electromagnetic Non-Kinetic Strike Weapon, or HIJENKS for short. HIJENKS. Again, high-powered joint electromagnetic non-kinetic strike weapon. That actually is a very aptly named product.
Is it a jammer or is it an actual, like it actually overloads?
I think it's an electromagnetic pulse bomb of sorts, which would render them rather useless. But
And
it's
they tend
not.
to be a little more secretive about these things because they're not very hard to shield against if you know what you're trying to
Right.
protect for.
You got
So
a Faraday
it's a
kit. Yeah.
little unusual for them to brag about it.
Right. Non-kinetic, meaning it doesn't explode, or it's not. Unless you happen to be like a ham radio, you wouldn't know that this had gone off, or a microwave, or whatever. So, yeah, that's really interesting because you could just render an area technologically back to the Stone Age, but the physical, no one would necessarily know. You'd have incredible plausible deniability. You could say it was a solar flare or some freak accident, right? By the way, that is not unlike what happened in the bombing of Hiroshima, by the way, because when that happened, it was not known, that technology was not known to exist. The ability to wipe out an entire city was not known to exist. It was not known by people outside of, the U.S. military apparatus that there was a bomb big enough to wipe out a city. And so
I mean, they
when,
had fire bombings, so they could just wipe out like with
right,
20 bombers
right,
versus having one. But yeah,
yeah, Tokyo was bombed to bits, right? But when it came to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when they dropped when Enola Gay came in and dropped Little Boy, as it was called, the 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 immediate decimation was so severe and intense that the U.S. didn't reveal that it was a bomb, because Japan's first instinct wasn't to think that that was a bomb, because there was no knowledge of a bomb that could do that. So the U.S. took advantage of that and claimed that the U.S. had partnered with God and harnessed the power of the sun, and that we could wipe out cities at will. And that's why they surrendered, because we implied
There's
that.
also mild part of Russia invaded Manchuria with the largest land invasion in human history, but that was 2 weeks before the end of the war, so it gets left off the history book part.
My point is that it's an interesting history and warfare of propaganda around implying,
So they did a live
supernatural.
test.
No,
They did a live test by dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then they didn't know what its extent at the expense of civilians.
no, it wasn't a test.
It wasn't a test, and then
Didn't it have to do with the emperor not going to yield because he had divine rule?
Correct. That's exactly right, David. Because Japan was felt they had God on their side, and that's precisely right. Because the emperor was claiming to be, of God, and so there was no need to ever surrender until the other country could demonstrate that, in fact, God was on their side. And that was the point that the U.S. was trying to make: was that's great, you claim that God's on your side, but we just showed you by evaporating a city that, in fact, God is on our side, and we're showing you that He is, because there's no way to explain how we did what we did unless He's on our side. That was kind of the point, and that's why they surrendered, because they realized, oh well, apparently God is on their side, so we probably should surrender anyway.
For anyone that
So
wants to learn more about weird alternative history that didn't happen, but I am very curious about why it didn't with things. Look at the Doolittle raid for the first time America bombed Tokyo very early in the war. It was just like a month or two ahead of time. This is before Midway. They literally sent they ripped out the tanks and did a super long range bombing mission, doubled the range, and freaked them out because they're like, wait, you can land in China, and that caused all sorts of badness afterwards. Something else that a lot of people don't realize is we had working nukes at like week 2 of like when they started the project. They were so confident it would work they didn't even test it because they're like, we guarantee it will work. It just uses a lot of uranium. It's called the Thin Man design. The thing that was really weird about that is when you combine those two things together, knowing that we actively bombed Tokyo like very early on in the war, and we already had working nukes, it really was a really weird alternative history of why did we nuke Tokyo at the very beginning of the war? Why did we wait till the end? If you go dig down that rabbit hole, you learn a lot of really interesting, weird things that are very bizarre about nuclear history. That's now it doesn't go with the popular narratives, but it's really interesting. We talk about some of these in the nuclear weapons room. If anyone wants to join us on those, they're really fun to explore.
Thomas Tong found an article titled "Global Team of Scientists Discover New Gene Causing Severe Neurodevelopment Delays." An internal team of researchers led by UC Davis has discovered a new gene implicated in a neurodevelopmental condition. So if you want to know if you have that gene, you could sign up for Arcus AI, the new startup that I'm advising, that will keep track of your DNA and reach out to all of these labs who are finding all of these interesting connections, and then notify you if you have that gene, so that you can start taking the precautions expeditiously. So anyway, the next one is from Tomoko, that BMW is now charging a subscription fee each month for heated seats. BMW is asking Korean owners to pay a subscription-based option like heated seats or driver assistance software.
The best thing ever.
The gift that keeps on giving. And then Thomas found...
Why don't they just do that for the seats themselves? Like, that make it even better. Like, you've got heating seats. Why just having seats? You could rent those. And then you have people essentially, like, crawling around the car.
You could just do the whole damn car. That's Volvo was the first to do the subscription car model, because
You'd like I'd rent the windshield, rent like the rear view mirrors, rent like the all the air conditioning. Oh crap! I haven't paid the bill. I'm not gonna fry to death because I'm in the desert edition version.
the a massive sunspot and huge solar flares could cause geomagnetic storms. With the sun approaching the peak of its solar cycle, space weather events are expected to get worse in the months ahead. By the way, it's 39 degrees in Paris. And I think that does it for the tweets today. So, unless anyone else has a hot tweet they want to share, we're going to hand it over to our friend Ben over there, who's doing a room right now that I will
In
pin to
fact, Messi is going to start a room now as well, Tech News
the... Okay.
Around Africa. So you have
Oh,
two
right.
options.
At the top of the hour, you can go join Messi for Tech News Around Africa, or Ben over there at How to Measure and Reduce Your Power Usage.
Yes.
All righty. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you mañana.
Thank